Questions, whether we choose.
I now call the special budget workshop for the Snoqualmie City Council to order. Jody, can we please have roll call?
Councilmember Jeans.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Lassay.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall has requested to be excused. Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
Mayor Larson.
I am here. May I have a motion to excuse Councilmember Sunwall tonight?
Second.
Okay.
I have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Sunwall. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.
Get all this space.
With that, we'll begin. Robert, I'll leave it up to you to determine when you want questions and answers. You know, just give us an indication. All right, so we'll assume that you want to keep moving through until you indicate otherwise, okay? So please note your questions are. All right, with that, Robert, we'll turn it over to you to kick it off.
Just to recap the agenda for tonight, we're going to start out with just another brief capital and summary discussion. I'm going to go over some more slides, a little bit more detail than last time. And then right after that, and again, the times are all tentative, but right after that, I'll hand it over to the Public Works Department. And then we can do some follow-up discussion afterward, time permitting on enhancements, and then next steps. At this point, we do have, if we do carry over, it would be Monday, November 26th at 5 to 7. And we would like to suggest that if the council could reserve Tuesday, November 27th if necessary in that evening. We can discuss this later if you need to.
Councilmember Mayhew and then Councilmember Lassay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You have
All right, but my question, so that's fine, that I don't have any disagreement with what's there. The thing that I'm not seeing, or I'm wondering about, I guess, is where's the time that the council will actually deliberate? So these all seem like informational sessions and then finalizing, but when will we actually?
I probably should have reworded this here for Monday would be the deliberation, and even tonight, if we get to that point where it says enhancement discussion, sorry, that's just my terminology, I would consider that deliberations.
Got it.
So I'll relabel it for next time.
So then, am I right to believe that the staff's believing that you'll have us through everything tonight, at least that's your goal, and that then those other meetings are really for us to get through our process and get to an approved budget?
Right, obviously dependent on what questions or what concerns are generated tonight.
Got it, thank you.
With the content.
Councilmember Lassay.
I had the same question.
All right.
Okay, so the next slide, I just want to go over some changes we made from the previous workshop. We kind of did some thinking on the way we were presenting the fund balance. And I know it was throwing some people off, and especially with the council policies. So we've made a change, and I think it's a change that's going to hopefully make this whole process a bit clearer for everybody else. So for years, per council policy, we set up the fund for, which is the general fund reserve policy. General fund contingency reserve, but it was still in the general fund. That was the confusion that we had, especially when I came into the job. That was one of the first questions I had. So you were setting aside all the construction revenues and sales tax into a specific fund. We believe and we determined that that fund should have actually been siloed as capital, meaning we should not have counted it as fund balance. So when I was showing the 40% fund balance last time, it was including that fund. That should have been siloed to begin with. And so the solution that we came up with was to just create a capital projects fund. So we're not going to talk about a community center fund. We're not going to talk about any special funds. We want to set up one capital projects fund where we're going to sweep the money that's still on fund balance from Fund 4 into that capital fund, because that probably should have been done a few years ago. That's about $3 million. And so from now on, in 2019 forward, all the construction set-aside revenues will go into that fund as well as a portion of REIT. And so hopefully that'll make it more transparent. And then the council will come back, we're thinking in the spring, to determine project list or considerations for that fund going forward.
And Robert, you mean by construction, you mean any sort of one-time, what's deemed as one-time revenues?
Right, one-time revenues from development.
Along with restricted or committed revenues.
Correct. So there's some little, additional services, but most of it's directly related to development.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Step out a second, can you, Brian? Mayor Pro Tem, can you please call in? No, can you please call in, folks? You can stay there if you want.
All of you be quiet. Go ahead. Councilman Mayhew.
So just to follow up then, so is it right that we should sort of think about the things that in past years we've thought of as the non-recurring revenues, that will now be in this capital projects fund, with the exception of REIT, which will be in the REIT fund?
Right.
And so if we take those two together, that's those non-recurring or one-time revenues that we set aside, that we've been setting aside?
Correct.
Got it, thank you.
Well, REIT, and just a side note on REIT, we'll have a portion of that going into streets, to support streets, and a portion of that going into this fund. And that's recurring over the time period. And I'm going to show you little breakouts that are going to make it clear in the next few slides here. So
to make sure
Well, question on this.
yeah.
Capital Fund 320, is that still in the general fund, or are we setting it outside?
Oh, that's capital fund. That will not be in the general fund.
So I get it, I think I've got this on the REIT fund. I think in past years, then there's been sort of a look at that each biennium, and then the council ends up saying, okay, well, this much here, and I think the point you were just making is, and we have said some of that we'll put back into streets operating. So you'll take us through that, just like we're kind of used to seeing what
Right, we'll
happens.
update that with actuals each year, because right now we're doing it based on the estimates of REIT each year.
Yeah.
We'll do that in actuals, and I have some charts later.
So,
Clarify a little bit. Can I keep going? And it's going to be clear.
all right, I still have questions on this. Go ahead.
So we did we removed streets from governmental type operating expenditures. That was another discussion we got into, because we wanted to make sure that people didn't get confused. So general operations of the cities on one hand, anything capital or supporting capital on the other hand. Streets is kind of a gray area, but again, there's a lot of capital attached to streets. So we're going to show that separately, and I'm going to show you the breakout of the slides. This is hopefully will make more sense. So again, we removed also from the revenue charts, and I'm going to show you updated charts in a second. We removed REIT, solid waste fee, and construction set-aside sales tax from the governmental type operating revenues. I can take your question now, Councilmember.
Okay, well, I guess two questions. I'll save my general question for next. So, why move this out of general fund to a capital fund versus keeping it in the general fund as a separate line item within?
Okay, so per council policy, and again, it's up to the council. If you wanted to change the policy, we can absolutely, go down that
We were
path.
operating under that council policy with it in the general fund. So the council policy doesn't require it to be out of the general fund.
Here was the catch. I'm not saying they wrote it wrong, but I would have written it differently, because it did set it aside for capital projects, but it did not actually set it aside for capital projects. So it was a bit ambiguous. It should have been set up as a capital fund. But you don't have to. The council could decide not
Meaning
to
of the
do
verb,
that.
whether set aside means take it out, or whether set aside means give it its own line item and watch it individually within the fund, we can argue how that verb goes, okay? I guess, so as I often am in the meetings here, so I'm a little concerned at this stage of when does this become the council budget? And at what stage do we start saying, yes, I want to do that, or no, I don't want to do that?
I think that's certainly one topic to
I'm still
deliberate.
getting a lot of shifting in the budget here, so I need some stability under which I can then start to make decisions.
So right now, there's no appropriation attached to this capital fund. We're setting it aside. We're going to come back in spring and have a capital projects prioritization. At that time, the council could decide to transfer some of that money back to general fund if they wanted to, but at the same time, this policy, and what I've heard from a majority of council members, right or wrong, what I believe I've heard through these workshops is the money is set aside for capital, you want to keep it set aside for capital, and this is what this would do. This would actually secure that as capital. Because again, you're not appropriating it yet, you're just setting it aside in a capital fund.
I reserve the right to at least ask for a no later, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, ask for a what?
A no later.
I don't understand what that means.
I could make a motion to say no, leave this in the capital fund.
Oh,
but-
no to this recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right.
Let's go through some of these other slides here, kind of give you the full picture here. So other changes made, street support transfers from general fund, we reduced that. And again, we're trying to keep the general fund self-sustaining, so the operating fund's self-sustaining. And again, streets is in that gray area. So we're permitted to use REIT, so we increased some of the REIT funds support to streets to reduce it from the general fund. And again, this is to make sure that the general fund is sustainable, operations are sustainable first. There will be some decisions on streets that will have to be made within the next 4 or 5 years, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. Future capital project transfers for capital, again, right now, we're proposing to go into the capital projects fund. That's up to council, of course, to decide whether or not to do that. That would include $650,000 from REIT annually based on current estimates of REIT revenues, plus the construction set-aside sales tax, one time. And this is just an updated worksheet. I'm not going to go through the details, but it's the updated worksheet based on what I sent you over the weekend. Again, the only difference is we took out any one-time revenues, and we also took out the streets. And so here's the 5-year forecast. And again, we changed this by pulling the streets out and pulling the one-time revenues out. You can see where we are slightly under for 2019, and the only reason for that is with Community Development Fund, we do dig into fund balance a little bit. There's about $1.1 million in fund balance in community development. We are increasing. There's 2 enhancements, as you know, in community development. One is the housing study. The other is the assistant planner position. But again, there's money set aside for those purposes and those projects and activities in that fund. So you see just that's the only thing accounting for that shortfall. Now, the second year, you can see where you're going to start to see the property taxes. And we think the property taxes actually might start increasing in 19 because of the it just depends when the Hampton Inn comes online and is open for business, and also the pads out there, because that will increase the property tax.
I'm sorry, what was that last one?
Councilmember Lissay?
The pads next, the restaurant pad and the
Councilmember
coffee
Lissay?
shop, I think it is.
I want to understand this, because I've not been through this before, so it doesn't register with me whether something's been someplace before and it's someplace new now, and it's going from here to there. What I look at is that 2 days ago, we showed a deficit that was greater for 2019 than it is now. Now, I don't know, where does that money go? Does it just poof, gone?
No.
Was it, because I guess one example I can use is I can decide to take my car payments out of my home budget. I still have to pay them. So the money's got to be somewhere.
Well, I'm going to show you.
So that's what I want to know where it is.
Show you where the deficit is. So again, we're just trying to show operating right now. So that's where it kind of got confused last time, but I'm going to show you the concerns we have on some of the other funds. Can you guys stop, please? Thank you. But we still have
Hang in there, Robert.
general fund balance of approximately $4.5 million in 2022. So again, after that, we are expecting operational expenditures to continue on an upward trend, but there is some concern on the capital, and that's what I'm going to talk about. A couple slides here. So I do want to bring up this slide, and I know it's Councilmember Holloway's favorite slide. We do have to show the scenario of what does the 5-year forecast look like if you do not take the 1% each year. And you can see that the gap is approximately $400,000 in 2022.
Chairman, not germane, we are not discussing not taking 1% for all the years.
This is 1% for one.
Well, I don't know that.
This is just for 1 year.
It's showing,
I don't know it either, so why are we discussing it?
because it would be just as Councilmember Say early in the budget discussions asked, I didn't presume, he challenged as to why I presumed to put 1% increase in there. So it's just as not germane to say, why would I presume 1% increases for the foreseeable future, as it would be presumptuous to presume, none. So the council has, the council.
I withdraw objection.
The council should have the benefit of seeing both scenarios. Councilman Say.
I would like you to explain how you get from a $78,000 revenue item at 1% to equal 400K
Because we
when it's 1 year?
No, we're assuming that, we have to assume from a forecasting perspective that if the council decides to do a policy of not to take that 1%, there's no guarantee it's going to be passed. So if we're
This
going to
chart
do due
assumes all
diligence.
years.
No, it doesn't.
But unless it's passed, it's
Shouldn't.
not there.
2-year budget, and that's all I would assume.
There were examples given of other communities that haven't exercised 1% for 4 or 5 years running. North Bend went 8 or 9 years without taking 1%. So this is a scenario saying, if the council were to go several years in a row without taking 1%, these are the cumulative impacts.
Okay, so we can take it as a hypothesis. and-
It's scenarios, just so you understand the consequences of decisions. Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understand what we're looking at, because I think we all may not be sure, or we may be thinking different things. So what I thought I was looking at was a chart that says this gray line would be if we didn't take the 1% just this year. But then in future years, we go back to taking the 1%. The fact that you didn't take this just for 1 year, that's, call it 80,000. I know it's a little less,
Right.
but call it 80,000 less this year. But it's also 80,000 less every year into perpetuity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because even though you go back to taking your 1%, unless you take your bank,
Right.
you're down 80,000 per year forever. And you're just showing that by the time you get out to 2022, just the 1 year, even if we go back to taking the 1%.
This would be each year I'm taking it
That is
out.
each year.
That is
So you're assuming that we just never take the 1% again?
From a forecasting perspective, only because.
And you're saying that only goes down 400,000?
That's my estimate at this point.
Which side of the argument you
I
on?
can show you.
Well,
I can show you the
I'm trying to follow the
background.
math in my head. It
We can do a
doesn't seem right.
sidebar. We can do a sidebar. I'll
This
show you
is-
the math.
You sure it's not worse
You're
than that?
doing a loss of 80 times 4 years equals,
I can see how he gets to 400,000, but if it's 80 plus the next year 160 plus the next year 320, it's got to be more than
Mayor,
400,000.
is that all things being equal? Are you actually programming in or at least projecting other revenues to increase?
Once you didn't take it, it's not
What's
in
the
the
total
base, so it's
difference?
never there
Well,
again.
it's the total difference
You're 80
between
lower on
the bump in
full
property
future.
tax.
Hang on a second. Let the council finish their discussion.
I'm sorry.
I wanna
Mr.
make sure
Larson,
that-
I didn't mean to do that.
These are
Sorry.
all revenue projections. So they're taking out the 1%, but they're including other revenue increases from property taxes. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the
So
net
it's-
difference.
it's not showing that,
It's just taking out it's cumulatively taking out 1% for 4 years, for 19, 20, 21, 22.
what, can you explain the statement, loss of over 400 is cumulative revenue? Is that only to do with the 1% or just with the total revenues?
No, that's just the 1%.
Okay.
I can break it up by year.
Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Mayhew.
I didn't want to.
So if I get this right, year 2020, 2022, I could not take the 1% for the next 5 years and still have a budget surplus of how much?
Didn't want to make a comment. I said cumulative, that's a little bit of a mistake. Each year, when you get to 2022, that difference in 2022 would be 400, about a little over 400,000. So I apologize about the cumulative statement. So each year it grows, that gap grows if you don't take it each year. Now, if you just didn't take it for 1 year, of course, you're just carrying over 78,000 for 4 years that you're not taking.
78,000
But also, I do
year.
want to remind council that we're not having a full budget session next year, so I don't know, how much deliberation will be in that 1% because we won't have a full budget session.
Councilmember Mayhew.
All right. Maybe the finance team could just help, because I'm doing something wrong in my head, and I'm not seeing what I'm doing wrong. So help me through this. If we make the following assumption, we assume that this year we don't take the 1%. We leave it banked in the future, we never take it, but starting next year, we take our 1% each one of those years. So we never fail to take our 1% again, but there's a 1% that's now just sort of banked. We didn't take it this year. Under that scenario, that means that this year, 19, we'd have 80,000 less than we otherwise would. And then in 20, we would also have 80,000 less than we otherwise would, right? So cumulatively, we're now missing 160. And then in 21, you're missing another 80,000. So now we're up to 240.
Probably close to $250,000, yeah.
Okay, and then if we do it again in 22, we're up to 320, and then I'm guessing you threw in some interest and some inflation factor and you got to 400. Isn't your 400 just the effect of a one-time failure to take the 80,000? You're not assuming that we fail to take it in future years. You're just saying if for 1 year we don't take it.
If you compounded it over 4 years, yes.
That's what I thought you were saying when you said cumulative revenue. So am I missing what you guys are saying?
It's too confusing, I understand that. But you're right, it's about cumulatively it's between $300,000 and $400,000 that you're losing.
So that's just of just not taking it for 1 year. Even if we start taking it again, as long as we didn't take it and we leave it in the bank, that's the effect.
That's the net effect.
Okay, thanks.
But we'll redo this slide.
From 1
It needs
year.
to be redone.
What's it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councilmember Ross?
So, looks like you're working on a calculator, Drew. Did you come up with a number?
So basically, my interpretation in this slide is the difference between $20.8 million in 2022, what we were initially predicting, subtracting out the $20.4 million, delivers that gap of $400,000. But if you were to compound and not take the 1% for a 5-year period, you're really looking at cumulatively subtracting out about $1.2 million. Yeah.
So, Mayor, I've heard 4 interpretations of the chart. If we can't explain it, get rid of it.
As I said, I will come back with a new chart.
Guys, that was sad.
Can we
Okay?
move on, please? Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Thank you, Drew.
I'm just going to move on. We'll redo those two slides. So 2019 governmental type revenues, total revenues 18.1 million, property tax $7.9 million. So again, what I did was I took out any of the one time. We're just going to show on this chart, and this correlates to, I'll wait till there's no sidebars.
Yeah, thank you. Councilman has asked to refrain from sidebar conversations, or I'm sure the information is pertinent to share with the entire council. So.
Yeah,
Councilor Mayhew?
yeah, fair comment, Mayor. Maybe you could sometimes give us just a moment before you move on to just we're trying to digest a lot of really big
Want
information.
to ask more questions, that's fine. Yeah,
So, anyway, we're done. Sorry.
all right. I mean, again, I'm inviting if you want to share with the other council some of that digestion, then that's fine.
Well, I'll just share, our sidebar was simply that one of the council members asked a question, there was a response, and it had the appearance that the response missed the question. And so we were just talking through that's what we believed had just happened. And that then the more extended conversation got us to clarity on exactly what that chart meant. But we were just, in essence, comparing notes. Did you think that the first answer wasn't right? And
Oh, okay.
we were just trying to say, because we're trying to process, how the heck did that get so hard to understand?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Okay, so governmental type revenues, see property tax 7.9 million, about 44% of the operating. Sales and use tax 2.9, fines, fees, charges for service. This also includes community development. We started doing some work on the community. We started looking at the community development fees, and we've noticed that some of our fees have not been for. The word is archaic. Yes, like $15 for something that should be a lot more. So we have some work to do on that end when we talk about community development. We definitely have some work to do on the fees. And utility tax, about 3.1%, 17%. You see expenditures, about 18.2 million, and again, it's because of the fees. The community development is something we're looking at there. You see building inspections, about 0.7 million, community development, 1.4 million, non-departmental, 1.0 million, parks operation and maintenance, 2.5 million, fire and emergency management, 3.3 million, police, 5.1 million, administrative departments, 3.9 million. So again, you can see the that should say revenues, I'm sorry. This should say revenues, it's 19.1 million. But you can see, and I mentioned this last time, the property tax goes up again once we get the Hampton Inn online and we get the property tax from the pads in front of the Hampton Inn. And that could happen in 19. That should say 19, sorry, that should say 20. This is 2020 here. And then this is the 2020 expenditures. So again, it's the same charts as we showed last time, we just pulled out the streets.
Back up so everybody can know which slide had the,
Yeah, this should be 2020. It's just.
do you have a number on that slide? or what?
2020 revenues is slide 11. 11.
How do you know that's slide 11 when I don't see anything?
Too white.
Huh?
We apologize for that.
So which one are we looking at?
It is on page
Page 5, bottom.
5.
No.
I'm sorry, it should be on page.
Or page 6 at the top.
Page
Yeah,
6 at the
page
top,
6 at the
yeah.
top. That should say 2020 revenues, total revenues 19.1 million.
Oh, okay.
So,
Councilmember Holloway.
general question. These slides, there's a city template for PowerPoint, and you use that city template to generate this presentation?
We've had a lot of changes, and so we've done our best to keep that template, but it's gotten a little gangly, I do
Okay,
admit.
I guess I'm just asking if that template would have black page numbers in the lower left-hand corner for you guys to all start with.
We could have
okay.
taken time, away from.
Understood? I'm
Yeah.
trying to hit next year.
No, absolutely. It will be cleaner, I promise you.
So,
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Ross.
so what was the difference between this slide? It's increased $1 million. What was the $1 million for?
So again, we have increases in the property tax, and we also have some sales tax increasing, but we actually had the fees, fines, and charges for service. That went up to 3.8 million. You can see it was at 3.6 million, so that's a piece of it. But you can also see the property tax went from 7.9 to 8.5. And so the charges, some of those were charges out to the general fund from other funds. So that's part of the charges for service, but we also had some of the fees and community development we were expecting to go up this year with the Salish project. So that was also part of that pot as well.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So just question for the finance director. Could you just go back a couple slides? More? One more.
Don't do it. Okay.
So on this, on this slide, I have a number of questions, but I'm guessing you're trying to get through a presentation. Is there, do you want them now, or do you
I would like them
want-
later, please.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So will you tell?
I thought we agreed to go through the
Yeah, no,
presentation.
yeah, will you let us know,
Your
or
call,
let me
Rob.
know when it would be the time to ask about this? For now,
I
I'll
will.
just, yeah.
It's a 10-year governmental type operating forecast. I'm sure I'll get some questions on this slide as well. This is what we're trying to do with this. It's a busy slide. What we're trying to do is show what would happen as far as a 10-year forecast. We got some questions about a 10-year forecast. So what I wanted to try to do was, here's total revenues, just as a baseline. If everything else held constant, what would revenues look like for a 10-year perspective?
Robert, you have a laser at the tip of that. There you go.
So what would happen for a 10-year, a 10-year perspective? And then you see expenditures, what would happen if all expenditures that we're estimating are equal going up to 10 years, and we took out the one time, we also took out the debt service that retires in here as well. What would it look like? And I, pretty much the focus of this chart is just to show a couple things. One, revenues with the mill site expansion. As you can see, if we build in development fee, we build in actually property tax fees and sustainable revenues. What does the revenues look like with the mill site expansion? Because of that property tax boost, you're getting up here, and with some sales tax, ongoing sales tax revenue from the businesses that would be forecasted from a development like that. So again, it doesn't have to be the mill site, but if a mill site size development going into the city in the future, you'd pretty much balance there as far as the operations. Now, again, we have some capital issues that I'm going to discuss in a moment, but just as far as the operational budgets, this is where you would be right here. You'd be pretty much balanced. But see, if the mill site did not happen, you did not get that new development, you did not get that property tax increase, you could see in revenues, you'd be at $24.5 million instead of $25.6 million if there was no development.
What's the growth rate on the total expenditures in that forecast?
It's between 4 and 5% a year on
Okay.
average.
So that's not including revenue from, for one-time permit?
No.
That's just what mill site will contribute? Or
We did
their
put some fees in here, but I didn't really bump them up that much. This is pretty much, this is ongoing, it's not one time. So it would be property tax revenue from the valuation of the properties going in there. It'd be a little bit of bump on a B&O for the proposed, at least based on the plans we've seen, proposed warehouse space, commercial space, and also some proposed sales tax revenue. So it'd be the ongoing revenues as part of that project. And pretty, again, the key to this is really the sustainability. You know, what happens if you don't take that mill site, don't have that type of development, and you're just in the status quo? And again, this is taking the 1% each year on the revenues. You're at 24.5 million.
Okay, if I add a comment, Robert, at this point. So I think it's important to understand that as much as we've kind of fixed on the 1%, if 1% is accumulating like over a 6-year period, as Councilmember Mayhew was describing, if it's, let's say the council for 6 years passed on the 1%. Some communities like North Bend have done that. The impact is you give up permanently 80,000 into the future for the first year. If you give it up the next year, then that's a total 160,000 into the future you've given up on. Grows to 24,000. By 6 years, you're up to over $500,000. And that's just with the 1%. What's absolutely going on that is not in our control is that we're losing roughly 2 to 3% per year, around 2% per year, to the erosive effect of the IMAN initiative or the fact that we're capped at 1% property taxes. So if our overall costs are going up, and you see 4 or 5% increases in staff and all that, it's overall it's in the probably neighborhoods, even if it's 3%, double that number, that $500,000 gross to. So we have every 6-year time frame, we have about a $1 million erosion in our purchasing power with the dollars that we currently have. If we don't pull the trigger on the 1%, that grows to about $1.5 million of lost purchasing power with existing dollars every 6 years. And so it pushes every cities across the state of Washington into a crisis where you have to pull the trigger on one. You only have one of 3 buttons that you can pull, or a combination thereof. You can raise taxes, which means you could prolong it. Instead of doing 1% per year, at some point you got to do a levy lid lift, which in most cases you'd have to do on about a 4-year cycle to keep up with that erosion. You can do economic development, which we've been strategically working on heavily for the last decade, and we're finally seeing the fruits of that effort in a huge way with the Safeway, Bartell's, the Hampton Inn, the Salish, and so forth, and even the more speculative mill site on the horizon. And the last is, or you just simply let service levels drop. But you can only play with that third one for so long before you don't have you can't use that one too long before you don't have a police department, fire department, or parks department, any other services to provide for the city. So that's a fairly limited tool. So it really falls to economic development or revenue or tax increases. So I think it's really important to look at those long-term projections, because even with those economic development components coming into play, it holds us off for a while, but all it's doing is it just allows us to push down the road further the need to eventually have to pull the trigger on either more economic development or more tax increases, and or allowing service levels to drop. Does that make sense to everyone? So we, instead of maybe on a 4-year cycle, we get to push off for 6 years or 7 years. So the more you don't pull the trigger on the 1%, you pull that cross of death there, which you see in 25, 26 right now. It starts coming closer to you. It comes faster on the horizon. Councilman Lissay.
I believe 3 council members have expressed a desire to get through this so that we can deliberate on these same issues and not continue to go through session after session of explanation. I would like to give the power back to Robert so he can get through his presentation and explain the budget so that council can start deliberations.
Thank you.
Continue, Robert.
So if I'm looking at, again, the capital fund and what could fund it, and again, this includes this includes both the sales tax set aside and again the subsidy I mentioned from REIT each year. So we're going to start out with $4 million projected for 19. Again, $3 million of that was banked. $1 million is coming in for revenue, and then we start with the REIT revenue in 20. So you go from each year you're saying $4 million the first year, $2 million the second year, and you see the Salish Lodge construction, that revenue comes in for next year, so you get extra, you're going to get more sales tax set aside from that. Then you have the Salish housing construction, which I estimated in '23. I know that could happen sooner. And then you see the proposed mill site construction, $1.5 million. Estimated on the scale of the Salish Lodge. It's just an estimate only, just for the purposes of showing the 10-year what that development could entail as far as contributions to capital for the city. And you can see, then it kind of flattens out. Maybe you have a tail end of that mill site, and then I go down to about 600, or just the REIT transfer per year. I have no growth in construction for 27 and 28. The REIT's about 600,000 of this number each year in contributions.
Robert, this isn't demonstrating what the balance in that fund is it?
It's not.
Okay, what's that?
It's not.
It's just individual years.
Potential
now.
revenue each
So
year.
you don't necessarily have to put a line connecting those. It's not indicating a trend. It's just
No, I don't need to put a line now.
It's just
You're
how
right
much
about
per year you're anticipating that would come in the foreseeable future.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Just so as not to confuse.
that. Again, it's what we could generate for capital if we set up this fund, put a programmed REIT transfer into this fund that's sustainable, and then also what we're estimating the one-time construction revenues to be each year.
Clarification.
Councilman Hawley.
2019, $4 million. What's the sources of that?
So again, $3 million would be to transfer from Fund 4 into the fund. And then we have another,
It's existing.
and then the rest is.
It's not revenue.
Right.
I'm sorry, so take 3 million off of that, it's not revenue.
Yeah. It's just, he's just sort of.
We're setting up the fund.
So in other words, if you were to roll all those numbers up and total them up, assuming you didn't spend a single dime, you could just say, oh.
I could just show what's coming in this year and not show that piece.
Right. So
In other words, over the next 10 years.
What's the new
here's how
money?
many dollars that we could total bring in.
Yeah, I could just show that piece I can just redo this chart and show that piece for 19, that's fine.
Is that the only year that you're going to be doing that? Are we going to bring any other funds in?
No, again, it's just ongoing.
Just the 19?
Just the 19, because that's the 3 million that was set aside.
All the
Yeah.
2020 out is all coming from the developer, right?
Well, REIT revenues, a REIT transfer from REIT plus, so each year we're going to do a transfer from what we're estimating REIT to be for those years. So revenues generated from REIT plus the construction set aside, or what we're anticipating
So isn't-
construction set aside.
Okay.
Councilman Hawley.
2020, where's the $2 million come from?
That comes from the Salish construction. So that's, again,
Well,
those 2 years of the
That's
construction.
2021, $1.5 million.
I should have labeled
Salish
it over
construction.
I know, I should have put it in the middle, 20 and 21, so first phase, second phase, part of that revenue in there.
Where, okay, and the community center does not transfer into this fund? It's a separate?
There's no community center at the,
All
I mean,
right,
there's
the
there's
community
no,
center
that's
is a
something for
separate-
the council to
You
decide.
could fund a community center out of this in part. It's just, that's a whole nother list of all the capital stuff you could put in here and have a conversation this spring to determine, here's a source for funding a number of capital projects, including a community center.
I'm just separating out my piles of $2 million.
Yeah, yeah,
Question.
this is strictly revenue here.
Okay.
And so when we get to streets, this is what I was mentioning before about the concern. So when you look at streets, what we're doing every year for a sustainable refund, or excuse me, a sustainable streets fund through the biennium, we're assuming we built 350,000, which is a little lower than we first anticipated, 350,000 each year for crack sealing and grind overlay activities. This does not include the parkway, does not include any grant funding or any outside funding. This is just city-funded street activity. So as you can see, we have a pretty substantial balance right now in street fund balance. For street purposes, not for general operations, but for street purposes, for the streets fund, we are drawing down the fund balance that we've accumulated over a few years to do some of those overlays and some of that work. So over time, you are drawing down that balance. The expenditures go up because operating expenditures, operating costs, just the standard inflationary increases plus the salaries. But you can see that we can last with the current transfers we have programmed into the streets till 2023. At that point, the council would have to make a decision sometime between now and then for extra funding for streets. It's either reduce capital in other places or look at doing the TBD funding, looking at a levy, something else to make streets more sustainable in the future. So this is really where the concern is when you're talking about capital, is where the needs are.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Just, I can't, this 350, this is the first time we've seen this number, right? 'Cause this is not something we've done in the past, right?
Well, you've seen it earlier. It's the first time we've done it. We have not done it in previous years, no.
Right, okay, so
That's correct.
this is kind of setting up, so I suppose that estimate must come from Public Works?
We kind of gave them the figure. This is what we could realistically sustain through a 5-year period.
Okay, so so there's the line, it took me a while to figure that neither the red line nor the blue line is fund balance. So fund balance is not on the chart, but you're saying if it were, it would get to zero between 2023 and 2024?
Yes.
So it's kind of getting drawn down in order to cover, oh, I see, it's covering the delta between the blue and the red?
It is.
Yeah,
But
I
again,
understand.
it's
Thank you.
covering it through the 5-year period, but after that, then you have policy decisions to make
Got
or
it. Thank
before
you.
we hit that point.
Robert, on the last bullet, is that forecast does not include grant funding for or nor the Parkway?
Does not include grant funding nor any funding for the Parkway. Parkway is a separate fund.
Okay, just want to make sure that wasn't a typo.
Parkway is a separate fund.
Why is it's not in there?
Parkway, we have the TBD funding, so the license fees, we have that going directly into a Parkway fund to set aside for construction in the future.
The tab fees on your license. Councilmember Ross.
So where are the revenues from?
So again, the revenues for streets are a mix of, and I can pull up the actual mix, but what we've done is we have funding from REIT. We also have funding from the solid waste fees that we receive at the city. That's also something that the city could reevaluate in the future as far as what those fees are, and gas tax. And again, we're assuming gas tax to be flat based on people's usage, vehicle miles. Gas tax just isn't growing the way it used to be. So those are some of the concerns and constraints on the streets fund if you're just looking at a standard.
But all that is rolled up into like the 1.8 million that you're projecting annually?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So would I be correct to understand this, that you took, earlier when you took out the non-recurring revenues and you got us to the 18 million number, what you've done here is you've kind of assigned those into some categories and some of that's being assigned here, is that correct understanding?
What do you mean assigned?
Because I thought that the
It's a
revenues you
two-streets.
just described were the same as some of those revenues. Am I wrong?
Well, we took out the solid waste fee, we took out the gas tax.
Yeah, you took it out over there, and so that we're seeing it here. Is
Yes,
that right?
exactly,
Yeah, so you
exactly.
kind of.
Yeah, that's
you've
the
put
revenue
it-
sources.
You've matched up some of those one-time revenue sources with some of these particular capital needs. Is that right?
Yes.
Got it.
Robert, one of the staff look that up while you're continuing?
Probably not. Can you just?
Well, I think you answered it sufficiently or sufficient detail. Were you, Councilmember Ross, were you satisfied with that?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. If you want to move on?
Wait for council.
Okay.
Are we good? Okay. Questions? Fine. Which one?
Well, I'm stuck on that last, estimated annual need.
So when you get to 2028, I'm just taking the rule of thumb at the end of the 10-year period, if we're looking out 10 years, what are you losing? Again, there's some cumulative losses here, but what is the gap? What do you need to fund that you're not funding now in streets if all other things are constant? Everything holds constant. To fund the same level of operations in streets you have now, you would need 500,000 a year extra. Extra meaning extra revenues from a different source.
So, no.
Councilmember Holloway, if you could use the microphone better.
So what, let me, dollars a year.
To that point,
So
and again, it
that
grows all the
is
way
the
from
budget
there.
shortfall in 2028.
Yes, it's a snapshot.
Okay, so it's not an annual and on.
No.
Okay.
Well, at that point, it's the annual need for that year, 2028, you need $500,000.
Well, and as, of course, you said, by the end of 2023, you will have expended the fund balance, and you're,
Starting out there,
if you're
yeah.
going to keep it, you're doing negative from there on.
Correct. Like I said, there are some funding sources the council can explore to make the streets fund more sustainable in the future, and we can do that at a future retreat or a workshop and talk a little bit more
Well-
about the options.
So guys, this is the bridge, the streets, you all throw that in. This is why I'm reluctant to take $2 million a year and sequester it off the side for a community center. I can't, in good conscience, do something with a community center when I don't have a plan for streets. If they can't get to the community center, why would I do that? So we need to balance all of these together, not as separate things and not where it's difficult to actually do that allocation later. But go on.
And then also at that point, especially when we talk about the capital discussion in the spring, what options are in your toolbox to address certain things? What options can you address a community center with? What options can you address the bridge with? For example, Dan's going to pursue grant funding for the bridge that he's pretty confident about. So there's, we're trying to, at least attach different options to the different proposals out there, and we're going to come to council with more detail with that later on. But again, like I said, there are some revenue sources that we can evaluate for streets going forward in the future and present those options to council in the future.
So Robert, it was my understanding, some discussions that we've had this past week or two, precisely because we were predicting that statement or concern that you just made, Councilmember Holloway, that the monies, the $2 million per year for the community center would be part of that capital fund that would be set aside. So in other words, it isn't sort of locking away and saying, if you approve this budget, it means there's $2 million there for the community center, and the only way it's going to move is if you vote to move it. It would be part of the conversation on all those capital liabilities, because, the two objectives under that goal were, first, we take care of all the existing stuff we have, facilities, streets, sidewalks, and all that, and then community center is the next one adjacent to that. So can you speak to that? I guess we're in this shift that you've done with capital, where you're thinking that, does the $2 million go into that capital bucket is what I'm asking?
Yes. So again, we're not doing annual transfers. We're starting out with a bucket of $3 million plus $1 million in revenue this year in 19 for the capital projects fund. So we're not taking $2 million a year. We're starting with that, or we're proposing to start with that.
Because now,
Councilmember Holloway.
same chart, I've heard two different things. It's starting to drive me crazy, guys. Is it $2 million for the community center in that $4 million?
There is no money for the community center because no money has been decided by council to allocate to the community center at this point.
So that money you've left in the fund balance, or left?
No. This would be
Filling
coming, this would be the capital projects fund would be up to the council to decide what to do with that community center, bridge, streets, anything you want.
I'm still not getting
That would be
clear
the
answer.
discussion.
So the $2 million, the 1.125 we decided to take from general fund, and the 750,000 we decided to take from REIT, is that in the $4 million? Because I've heard you say yes and no in the same sentence.
It is, this is just one pot of money now, so yes, it would be in there.
Okay?
Yes.
And so the same 1.125 and 750,000 is at $2 million in 2020.
So again, we are not taking those transfers now. In lieu of those transfers, as I mentioned when we started this evening, we are not doing those transfers now. Instead of what we were doing before, there's no more transfers. So no 1.2 million, no 750,000. Instead, we're proposing to take the fund balance from Fund 4, which is $3 million, have a year of support the first year, and then have REIT support each year plus sales tax construction into this capital fund that each year the city council can come back, reprioritize their capital projects, and appropriate at a future date and prioritize which projects and what they want to spend the money on, whether it's a community center, whether it's an all-inclusive playground, those types of things. So we're trying to make it
I know,
easier,
good, because
not harder.
my main issue has been, up until now, is I got a problem this big, but I have a solution for this. And until we have the discussion of how I solve this, I don't know if making that solution makes the rest of it untenable. So if you're telling me what we've done is we're just putting a capital fund and it all goes in there, we're not doing the community center fund as a named target item, great, I'm with you, because I really do want to address that bigger issue.
Yeah, it's a named target item in
Good.
my mind. In other words, I'm trying to be responsive to all the goals and objectives that the council did, but we didn't quite get to the, a more refined prioritization process. But in lieu of that, yes, it's just saying, in this budget, it's giving you all the tools to look at a spectrum of choices on all those issues there and preserve that choice, or preserve your ability to exercise on those options. But Brian, I hope you understand from where I've operated from the past 13 years or more is, high priority for me to make sure we're staying in that proactive stance in terms of maintenance on infrastructure. I'm not at the least bit interested on facility, streets, or anything else of shifting into a lot of deferred maintenance, and then we're wasting a lot of community money because we're not taking care of our assets. And then by wasting, I mean we're spending 4 or 5 times as much fixing the roof that we neglected. We could have fixed it $300 when now we're fixing it when it costs $3,000. So no one's served by that. So that to me is priority one. That was delineated in the council goals and objectives as saying that's priority one. And then things like the community center, or if we can have the capacity to tackle those, then we look at that. But we need to look at that in a whole conversation. That's obviously going to take more than a few hours in a budget meeting.
Need the whole picture.
We need to bring that into a more lengthy, detailed capital, discussion in a retreat over a few months early in next year.
And take into, I think it's your next slide, I mean, I run out of gas in 5 years.
So,
excuse the pun, but I got to do something.
Councilor
So
Shepherd.
in 2019, the money that's coming in the slide that you were at, you go back. The money that's coming into the capital fund, is that something that could be used for non-capital expenses or not?
Some of it is not. So REIT cannot be used for non-capital or non-streets expenses.
What portion can be used for other things other than capital expenses?
Well, the city, zero, unless the city council decided to change the policy on the construction one-time revenues from sales tax. So right now, all of it's restricted because of state law or council policy. The part that the council can determine differently is this construction set aside. The council could decide to overturn that policy and use it for operations.
We can overturn that policy at any time.
Yes.
You could, yeah.
With the majority.
Be clear about when you use, as I think Councilmember May was pointing out, when you use language like restricted, that usually pertains to things that are restricted by state law. When it comes to things where the council has imposed upon themselves a policy that's committed, you're committing certain funds. In other words, it's not responsible for us to be building an ongoing operation, hiring police officers and firefighters based on non-reoccurring one-time revenue from development and growth. What happens when that growth and development stops? The revenue dries up, and now you're in a major crisis laying off police officers and firefighters or other city staff. So as a policy, that's why we've always kept those segregated. Councilor Mayhew.
So, Mr. Hammoud, let me see if I've got this. I think that what you've done, if I'm right, is going back to previous discussions where various things were potentially moving in various ways for capital. If I'm understanding this right, you're basically saying, forget that. What we try to do here is simplify it, and I'm seeing 2 buckets. You've taken all the one-time revenues, what we've called one-time revenues historically in the city, and you've put that into 2 places. There's a REIT fund and a capital fund, and you've put it in between those 2 things. That covers that whole universe of one-time revenues, right? And then you've taken all the expenditures that would go against that, which is all our capital expenditures and some streets maintenance, and you've put that into 2 buckets, which is either this bucket called capital, or if you advance a page, this would be the other place it is. It's in those 2 places. So all the spending of that money is in these 2 places, and all the one-time revenues is in one of those 2 places. So you've kind of made an initial match up of which revenues would go into which buckets for those 2. But actually, both of those buckets, where we match up the revenues, which expenses or expenditures we decide on, whether it's streets, whether it's parks, whether it's facilities. All of those capital decisions will be made subsequently when we have some time, but we'll have put them in these funds where then all we have to do is approve the actual expenditure. But we'll have put them in these funds and said, yes, we authorize spending those capital monies, but actually you can't spend, in essence, anything yet because you'll have to come back and get approval from off of us of how that gets allocated and therefore which specific projects you can go forward with.
Right.
Is that the idea?
It is, yes.
And so what we're left with then is just the recurring revenues and the related operating expenses. And those were those other charts that were around 18 million each that you showed us.
Right.
That's the big picture.
Right.
Got it.
So Reed, for example, in 2020, a little different mix than 19. 2020 and ongoing from 2020, it's $1 million in streets a year is what we've determined at this point. We still have an LGTO bond that we pay $100,000 out of that fund to. That's been ongoing, and $650,000 to the capital fund. So again,
Did you mean 650 to the
capital fund?
capital fund? Okay.
So to Councilmember Holloway's point, if the council determined to take X amount and spend it on street overlays, we can do that. Then it would free up some money in the street. So that's one of the options. Again, you want to rehab the city hall, you could do it out of this fund. So any capital project citywide, you could use this fund for operating,
So you're saying-
for non-utilities capital.
Councilman Lusay.
So you're saying we could, I mean, we could, we're not, I don't want to use the word restricted because I know it has special connotation, but we're not limited by what we want to apply it to as long as it doesn't violate those state laws and what it's applied to. So overlays, new parks,
Sure.
lights on ball fields, inclusive
Anything.
activities,
Exactly.
community center, whatever we want. I like it.
Yes.
Right.
Simple.
Councilman
We could even, if we wanted to, go forward one slide. If we wanted to solve that problem,
Yes.
we could do it with, go back a slide, we could solve it with that if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay, and so your point is, that's going to come back when we have time for a bigger conversation about capital. I presume we're probably going to push out that CIP to the 5 years, and so this is going to happen later when we have the time to get through a whole capital budgeting process.
Yes, we're hoping to come back at least with a preliminary discussion in January or February.
So what
of this
you're
year.
asking us to do now, in this budget cycle,
Fund the first part.
is approve these basic splits and approve that operating budget. And then we're going to approve broadly setting this money, putting this money into appropriations for capital, which will then get determined later when we have time to really dig in, and that's when we'll authorize the particular uses.
Correct.
Got it.
And Bob and I already today talked about the fact that we'll need to start working on an agenda for the retreat come February or so, late January. So we're already giving some thought to that. With the mayor pro tem, whoever that may be.
So I'm sorry, what?
No, he was.
Councilor Mayhew.
So it's like a lockbox. We're going to put the money
Right.
into.
Oh, no.
Little political humor. I was kidding. I was kidding.
I think he was being facetious.
Sequestration.
Any other questions, council?
Let's move on.
All right, Robert, you want to move on?
Could you just hold on one second, Mayor?
Yeah.
You do-
Yeah. Other than at one stage, we called that an expense chart, but it's mostly a revenue chart.
That's a revenue
Expenses in
chart.
this at all.
Revenue chart. Mostly a revenue chart.
There's no expenses in
Oh,
this.
no, he's,
He knows what I'm
yes, with a sort of a ending fund balance revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just shifting
To
money around, it's not
start,
revenue.
to start with, it's
There are
not
no
really.
expenditures.
Yeah. Let's just put it this way, that the number to start with is a roll-up of the past several years of revenues, and then we start from that point. Right. Councilor Russo.
And again, this is not a cumulative chart. This is each year
Right.
on year.
Right.
where we have the potential. I mean, economies change, things go on hold, things accelerate, stuff modifies, but it has the potential of revenue on each year, although there will be expenditures to draw that down at various times during the year as well. But the concept is, I understand it.
Yeah, somebody asked me for a spiky chart. This is your spiky chart because this is all subject to change. You never know what the economy is going to do. You don't know policy-wise. Council could decide to go a different direction. Anything, or we could end up with larger projects, something like that we don't anticipate. So anything in there could impact this chart, but that's why we're trying to put the more volatile revenue sources, commit them to capital, and get them out of the operating. That way that operating is more immune from downturns. Now, again, this chart's hard to see because it's really busy, but what I tried to do here on this gray line at the bottom on the 10-year forecast, I tried my best guess at what a recession would do, just hypothetically, and it could happen in any year, but what would a recession do to our unique revenue sources at the city of Snoqualmie? And it's really challenging because 10 years ago, this was a different city, different population, different makeup. So there's really no history on this, like most cities have, where they can say, oh, last recession we had, 2% decline in sales tax or something like that. Here, it's a little hard to tell. So really, on your one-time revenues, that's where it's going to hit. So if I went back to this, if you had a recession, you assume a lot of those numbers are going to be down because REIT would be down. REIT went way down here in 2012. Granted, that was an anomaly. Most economists would not predict the housing market to crash as much as it did in a future recession. That was really a unique situation with the subprime. But these numbers would be depressed. But again, that's not going to impact your operating. So in this chart, this would be reduced during those down years. This chart, what we were trying to show on this chart here, was on the operating revenues, what would that impact be? So your ongoing sales tax, your ongoing property tax, what would it look like? And we're pretty much, what we're saying is from the 2 years of the recession into the third year, we're pretty much holding property taxes, pretty much flat except for the 1% in there. We're pretty much holding it flat. Because you assume, say that a recession happened, you assume if there's a home developer that wants to build, they're not going to build during a recession. And we saw slowdowns here when that happened as well. So we assume that on property tax, your valuation would hold flat because there wouldn't be any development. That's your biggest hit. Your sales tax, I actually didn't really depress it because I held it at 3% for those out years, and 3% is pretty much the rate of inflation right now. So because we don't have a lot of brick and mortar, we shouldn't have a significant impact. You might see like 2 to 5%. You might see restaurants go down a bit. You might see some of the retail spending at Safeway go down a bit, but not significant. If we had like a Fred Meyer or a Target or a Macy's, then you're seeing double-digit decreases for some of those brick and mortar stores, but we don't have that here. And as you go up, and as you could see, once you're at a lower base, you're rising from a lower base. So if we're decreasing the base, we're going above the base here. And I did not build in new development I built some new development in the out years, but not as much as the green line. And so I ended up at about 22.5%. So pretty much I'm taking, all things constant, I'm taking about, when you go on the 10-year forecast, in that 5-year period where I'm projecting the recession to end, I'm taking about $2 million or so out of the revenues. That's my best guess, at least.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Sorry, could you just go back to the spiky chart?
I like that.
I stole it.
So the point here is, this is consistent to what the city's financial policies in the past years, which is these are the non-recurring revenues. So the idea is we pulled, I'm questioning if I got this right. We pulled these non-recurring revenues out. That's the whole nature of non-recurring. They spike around like that. But these revenues are now used to pay for capital spending, which we can behave in a spiky way if we so choose as well. If we're planning to replace some parks playground equipment.
Like the
We
new
can
roof.
postpone it a
Yeah,
year.
new roof on the Snoqualmie Point Park, or
Right.
the all-access playground, or,
Right, so we can push those out a year if we need to get from a dip year to a spike year. We can push that out a year. Whereas the recurring revenues, that's what's paying the salaries of our employees, and that then is coming out of recurring revenue that isn't so spiky. The spiky stuff, set aside and use that for capital. That's kind of the concept here. Am I right? Right. Thank you.
I think the 10-year horizon is far more beneficial to look at than even a 5 or 6, and the reason why is even if everything's coming our way in terms of where we're planning for diversification of revenues, like the Salish Lodge, the Hampton, and all that, the Salish Lodge, let's say in the best case scenario, would be pushing $750,000 to $1 million of revenue per year. Well, even if we're exercising our 1% every year, we're still losing about 2%. That, as we were talking about with the compounding of that, losing it every year, that compounds quickly within 6 years to about $1 million. That means the benefit of that economic activity or revenue has lasted you about 6 years before you're back in the erosion in your budget has lasted a little more than 6 or 7 years before you're back to status quo again. So unless a new development comes on the horizon, that's the impact that all cities have been struggling with in the state of Washington. So again, you got 2 other tools in your toolbox if you don't want to keep chasing development, and that is you got to go out for levy lid lists on a rather consistent basis, or you got to be looking at taking some hard whacks in your service levels and reducing costs, which, as I stated before, is very, very limited. You can only do that for so long. Councilman Hussain?
On the 10-year forecast chart, that one. I like forecast charts. I like looking at them and seeing how trends can happen. The one on this that I think what we would, in all practicality, if there was a dip in revenues, whether it's a recession or it's a depression or it's whatever it is, call it what you wish, council will only be able to act on that in every 2-year biennium period. So it's important to note that with that sort of thing happens in a year, let's say it happens like this, your 19-20 budget is set, your 21-22 budget is set, you're not able to react to it until you get to your 23-24 years. So if we wanted to reduce, in terms of reducing expenditures to balance the reduction of revenues. So it's important to note that although this forecast has a constant 4 to 5% increase, more than likely the council at that time would have to reevaluate the expenditures to understand the balancing of that as well. That goes to fund balances, that goes to existing revenue sources at that time. So in all likelihood, whether that expenditure line was a consistent 4 to 5% it's probably not entirely the case, but I do like that it gives you some understanding of how that would have to be adjusted. So I do like the way that at least spells that out over longer term.
All right, I don't know if you heard the question because you were talking to Bob, Robert, but yeah. Well, I just quickly wanted to say that you do a mid-biennium, check. So if there's something like we suddenly tumble into the Great Recession again, we clearly have the ability even in that mid-year to make some adjustments.
Well, I don't want to, if it's dramatic, sometimes, but if you don't, how many people recognize what was happening in 2008 until 2010? You really, I did. I was somewhere else. I was overseas and watching the whole economies fall apart. But the point is that it usually takes a little, we're the Titanic trying to avoid an iceberg. It doesn't happen very quickly.
Yeah, true. Councilmember Shepard and Councilmember Mayhew.
So one of the things that, now that they've brought this to my attention, is that there's a gap, 3 million gap in 2028. And I'm thinking, how long will it take us to actually be able to accumulate a reserve fund if we don't anticipate being prepared for that now?
I'm sorry, a 3 million gap if you between a recession and between?
Right, and anticipated total expenses is $3 million gap, right, between 25 and 22.
If you had a recession, that's the worst case scenario.
Right, but I'm thinking that if you have a recession, if you find out about it halfway through, after you've spent a lot of your reserves, you're going to have a heck of a time catching up to prepare, be able to outlast a recession like that. I'm thinking maybe we need to think about having a larger reserve.
Councilor May?
Well, we had about a 4 million, in 2022, we're estimating, based on everything right now, about a $4.5 million general fund reserve in '22. So when you get to that point, if you're still balancing like we were on the optimistic chart, you wouldn't spend it down. But if it was $4 million and you hit that recession, it took $2 million, we'd still have $2 million left if you kept the 4.5. So
Well,
we
I mean,
still have reserves. We're not spending all, we're not spending reserves at this point.
Well, during the last recession, we shaved, I seem to recall, memory's a little fuzzy, maybe about close to $3 million out of some of the cost increases. So you definitely see that coming and make adjustments in those cost increases as well. Councilmember Mayhew?
So I was going to bring up this exact same point. So just, we actually have it split across 3 funds, but we have 2 funds for these sort of negative shocks to the system. We have a fund a little over $1 million, which is for if something happens. Now, I'll use a bad example, which is Canyon Springs. That's a bad example because it comes out of our, it comes out of a different fund. It comes out of the utilities. But if we had some $1 million problem suddenly arise out of nowhere, we actually have a fund that's got a little more than $1 million in it specifically for such an outcome. So we've got that. But separate from that, we have a several $1 million fund, and I think it's the fund that the finance director was just referring to, that the specific purpose that we, the council, established that for is for, it's called rainy day, but what it means is for a recession. So the idea is you would then draw on that to cover your expenditures when the revenues sort of suddenly fell out. And I just did a rough calculation because I was just curious. I wanted to form a viewpoint on whether I thought it was, how strong I thought that reserve was. Keep in mind the average reserve, the average recession in the United States is about 11 months. So we've got, and you have to make some estimates about how much revenue we would lose, and I think that's what the finance director tried to do with these gray line. But if you take the average recession of 11 months and the downturn the economic downturn of the average recession, and you double it, that's about equal to what our fund is, our fund balance is. So I think we've got a pretty strong fund balance to cover this eventuality. Now, the thing that we don't have is any policy that tells either us, the council, or tells the administration under what circumstances and in which amounts they could pull on that fund. It sits there with no rules on how to use it. So one of the things we might do out in this springtime when we're looking at these capital fund balances and the use of these these non-recurring revenues and trying to make some decisions about capital spending, it might be a good time to also think about some rules around the rainy day fund that would make us all feel perhaps even some more clarity about how this would work and why we think or don't think we're okay. But I'll just to summarize, my own personal view was at double the normal recession, which is what we're funded at, that seems sort of to pass the smell test to me.
Councilor Ross?
I have a question to your first statement, that we have $1 million fund in what?
Is that the emergency reserve?
That's I think of it as is that its actual
For
title?
Big flood events rather than. Operating reserves, contingency reserves, general reserves.
It's called the contingency reserve.
Right. Estimated fund balance for Fund 2, the contingency reserve fund in 2018 is $1.036 million. For the operating reserve fund, Fund 3, that's $744,000. So those two funds, but our general fund, has an estimated fund balance of 1.45 million. So those three, that's your rainy day.
So you said the contingency reserve fund, the general fund, and what was the third?
Operating.
Operating. Operating reserve, okay.
Councilmember Holloway?
So I want
Oh, so, I'm sorry.
I still had another question. So I guess to separate, so we still have the, is it 10% that we're supposed to be stocking away in the general fund, right, for reserves?
Yes.
Okay. So that is totally different than, we just saw the 4 million that's sitting in the capital fund.
Right.
That's totally separate
Right, it
buckets.
doesn't count it. I think I was confusing people before because we were lumping it together. So we broke it out to show you that this is just pure general fund reserve that's left now.
Okay, so we have reserve, and then we have the capital fund, and so for the reserve, that's where you would continue to reserve it, and if we do run into recession, then we would be able to pull from the reserve, as long as we identify what we can pull from it.
Yes, and we have to probably
Through
clarify
policy.
the policy, which fund to use, where's, the money going to be housed, what are the limitations on it. So that'll be policy work for the council in the future, in F&A.
Councilmember Holloway?
So just for understanding, the gray line, the recession, basically, the incantation of recession in this is you're assuming 0% fund or revenue for 2 years?
Essentially, yes, flat. So I'm not going down with it, because there's nothing in the city that would really cause it to go down. If we had more retail, brick and mortar, you'd see a decrease.
No, and I'm
But-
kind of going the other way. We've done a good job of trying to balance the revenue mix, but a large chunk of the revenue, sadly, is recession-proof, and that's the property tax. It's going to,
It's going to flatten, it's not going to go down necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to go down slightly, but,
it's gonna go.
well, it depends on.
It can't,
there's a
pretty
lot
much,
of factors.
it's based on the AV divided by the value of the houses, so it really doesn't go down.
The millage rate would roll up as the housing prices drop, so it's pretty stable.
Yeah, it's pretty stable. Even if you don't take the 1%, it won't go down.
No, it doesn't.
That's why we pulled REIT out of the discussion, because that's where you would see the drop, because
You
it'd
would
be
see the
less
drop in
people
REIT, yeah.
purchasing homes and building homes and selling them, of course.
This is truly a
It
worst
helps,
case, that gray line.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Councilmember
assuming also in the gray line, it's a big assumption as well, but I'm assuming when you come out of a recession, and I've noticed this at other places where we've got really hit by the recession, builders would be less apt to just go gung-ho right after, so I did not include a bump from the mill site yet. I included a gradual increase, but not a large increase going into the future there. So a slower growth coming out of it.
Councilmember Mayhew and then Councilmember Ross.
So I just want to make sure, because I got a little confused by the answer. So my understanding is Fund 002 is the contingency reserve.
Yes.
And by policy and in fact, we fund it at the maximum permissible under state law,
Yes.
which there's a formula, and it comes out at a little over $1 million, I think probably the number that I heard mentioned.
37.5 cents per $1,000 is on the assessed valuation.
Okay? And so we're fully funded there, and that is for contingencies. Things like something breaks, that's what we would use that for. So something unexpected breaks. So that's $1 million. Then I thought we had Fund 003, which I thought by policy was set at 5% of operating expenses. I think it may
That's
be
one of those funds-
overfunded, but I'm not-
That's one of those funds where there's 730,000 in it, so if I took, that's about, well, almost 10%. It's probably overfunded a little bit.
Okay, but the policy is 5%. And then I thought Fund 4004, which I think is definitely overfunded, I think, but it has a policy of 5% as well.
Right.
So to the 10%, the number that I was referring to earlier is, so I think Fund 04 has a couple things going on. It's got an overfunded, which is what you're trying to pick up for capital, but there's still, it's part of that rainy day fund. So rainy day fund is 4 and 3.
No.
Is that correct?
It was commingled. See, that's where it gets
Yeah,
really
a
confusing.
part of
It was
4.
commingled, right.
So a part of 4.
And that's what we're
and
trying to
3, you're trying to untangle
unbundle
that.
it, yes.
Yeah. So, but a part of 4 and 3 is our rainy day fund. 2 is our contingency fund, and then you've got some fund balance in 001 which you're also looking to dispose of, right? Into
Correct.
capital, yeah, okay.
Would you also, so,
Councilmember Ross? And then I'll go to Councilmember Holloway.
You've already answered it. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Holloway?
but part 003 is operating reserves, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so keep in mind, your revenue streams are not consistent month to month. And there are chunks of times where we're not getting money and we're paying bills.
Yeah, we'll go 6 months without the tax revenue check from King County. And that got to keep the lights on, everything running smoothly. I think Brian joined the council years ago, and we didn't have those operating reserves. And we were doing all kinds of tricky, weird interfund loans to keep things moving, and it just, I think we had findings with the auditor, and it was really a pain in the butt. It was a tangle. So this just helps things run smoothly. I'm sure Robert appreciates it.
Yeah, but you can't necessarily consider those as available
Right.
because you're going to spend them down and bring them up and spend them down and bring them up.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to be tapping into those for operations or for emergencies.
It's got to be a really rainy day.
Any other questions or concerns, council?
Let's move on.
All right. I think we're ready to move on, Robert?
So I'll hand it over to Dan.
Well,
I did have one other question. I was going to save it till later. I could do it now.
sure, now, yeah.
I don't want to get too deep in this. We can get far more deep into this at the next meeting if we need to. But if you would go back to it. Yeah, keep going back. Keep going. Whoops. Nope, go forward again. Sorry. That one. I did some math on that. I'm a little worried that we're not conservative enough. And I know, so I'm not criticizing that someone put this together. I think this is sort of a policy or it's an assumption that's in there that the council is going to need to buy into or decide they want to be more cautious but the thing that I just calculated that the increase in expenditures, so this is our operating with the spiky stuff out, but from 19 to 20 the expenditures go up 2.2%. It just seems like we're likely to go up much higher, but I think that's because maybe there's some, anyway, from 20 to 21, it's only 3.8%, and then 21 to 22, it's only 3.6%. So with that in mind, I started to worry that that was just too low, that maybe it's more like 5%. And so then I just did a little calculation. I said, well, what would it take to close, just to make the expenditure line go flat, or just go even with the blue line? So if we start in 19, where they're essentially the same number, and we just kept them, we moved the expenditure line to equal the revenue line.
In other words, what percent of increase in
Could we afford?
Yeah.
Right. From 19 to 20, it's 6%, which I'm guessing is more like what we might do. But then from 20 to 21, it's only 3.6%. And 21 to 22, it's only 4.5%. So my concern with this is that that's holding us to some very stringent expenditure controls going forward, which seem very different from what we're doing now. And I'm just worried that those expenditure lines may be more like equal to the blue line, if not pushing, trying to push above it. And I just raise that because I think we start thinking about policy later and which things we want to do and which not. I'm just worried that there's very little room for mistake, or to put it a different way, it just seems like we're making some very aggressive assumptions, and I'm worried they might be too aggressive. I don't mean that pejorative. I'm not saying that someone's done a bad job estimating. I'm just saying that's an estimate, but what if we end up wanting to do a little more than that? We just won't have much headroom. And so we need to just be aware of that as we go through our deliberations.
So what this does not have in here, it does not have, and again, this is where discussion gets a little complicated, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but we don't have any enhancements in 21 and 22 in here. So
Or staff increases? Yeah.
Right. But remember, we also increased some of the revenue coming into the general fund with some of the administrative positions. So there was some expense out, but there's also some revenue coming in for the positions like mine in the finance department. and the attorney's office, that's allocated out. So when you add a new FTE in City Hall, for example, there's a funding split, but it's not a full 100% to the general fund. Now, we have built 2.5% each year of contingency into general fund spending. That goes through 2022 on this chart. Actually goes through the 10-year forecast. We built it through the whole time. So we build in that contingency. So the question is, I know there's been past practice here. There's been a lot of agenda bills coming after the budget, and that's something that I first flagged when I came in here, because really with this 2-year budget, we really flushed it out. We sat with the departments, and Drew can tell you from his experience, for hours and hours and hours trying to get this right. And as part of kind of that house cleaning that we did internally, we took away some of the one-time expenditures we saw that were carrying year to year. So we're taking that back, because that was kind of like an artificial reserve. We're making sure that we're not carrying over expenditures. What you need each year is what we're budgeting. On the other hand, we had some parks items, for example, we moved to stormwater because there were qualified expenses that we were not putting to the right pot of money, so to speak. So we were really trying to be efficient, and we were trying to divide it up. If it was capital, we're moving it to capital. Fund support and the expenditures. So we're really trying to say this is what the general fund spending or the general government spending of the city is. So what could alter this number in the future if the city decided to, like, just based on the policy discussions that the council has been having, if they decided to increase the money to affordable housing, that would come out of this pot. If they decided to increase, like, the human services fund for other programs in the community, that would come out of this pot. If they decided to increase even support to the capital funds, that would come out of this pot. So there are some scenarios that would fit into what Councilmember Mayhew was discussing, yes.
Yeah, that was only the point I just wanted to make, is there's very little headroom there. So I trust that you guys have done, that's actually really encouraging to hear the work that you've done to really try and flesh that out. And I would just say there's still very little headroom for future enhancements, things like that, and we just need to keep that in mind.
Good note of caution, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's try and wrap it up with this, because now Dan's ready to jump in. Councilman Lissay.
Well, I was just going to add to that, because I think that's a good observation from 19 to 20, but our budget is also assuming an increase from 18 to 19 at 13.7%. So although the 19 to 20 increase is only 2.2%, a lot of those things are because of added staff or funding that's occurring in the first year that doesn't roll over the second year. So again, it's a 2-year budget, so we've got to look at it from a standpoint of a 2-year cycle. And when you balance those out, it comes down to, ironically, roughly 6.5%, which is right around that 6% of what the revenues are increasing or during that same time. So I think it is in parallel when you look at it a 2-year cycle. If you try to go too deep and too far into the weeds, it does look like it's off kilter, but the reality is it just happens to be that a lot of those happen in the first year of the 2-year budget, not in the second year. So
Did we expect to carry this over to the council's retreat in there early 2019? There's a lot of more deeper discussions we have to have as far as setting policy for the future. So
got it.
And Councilmember Lassay, you touched on a good point, because the other question is, as we go into the future here with the revenue and situation of the city, Snoqualmie's not going to build much more. And so eventually you're going to get into like the 10-year, you'll have one more project, but there might be nothing after that. And then you're more like other cities in King County that are completely constrained by their city limits and have to look at other taxes, lid lifts, renegotiating their utility fees, things like that, to balance their budgets.
Right.
So
there may be other
challenge.
opportunities, but we need to look at those as opportunities, not as necessities. And I think that's my goal at looking at the budget is, when we do look at a 5-year forecast or a 10-year forecast, is the goose that laid the golden eggs already came and gone. Now we need to be balanced from year to year, so that if we do have opportunities, we can take them or we cannot. We don't have to be chasing the everlasting dollar just to keep up.
I think those are very important considerations that we need to bring back to the retreat.
Yes.
So we need to get focused on the next set of issues here. We got to get done tonight. We want to get to council into their other deliberations eventually.
All right, Dan, you're on.
Dan can be quick.
Thank you, sir. Yes, for those of you that know me.
You've been
Too many.
Well, so I don't need to make any changes to committee meetings.
All of them, actually, I think. I've been to all of them. I don't think I missed that one.
All righty. Well, good evening, Mayor, City Council. have with me here somewhere. Here they are. Todd Satzberg, Ops Manager, and I'm Dan Marcinko, Parks Public Works Director for those watching. And then Brian Kraus is Ops Manager for Maintenance. We also have with us, you guys probably have not seen Dusty Possert. He is our Water Superintendent. So he's been around, he's pushing 20-year mark. And then Don Harris right next to him, who you guys have seen doing the fleet facilities. So, I am going to talk very fast. So, if you have questions, let the mayor or myself know, jump in quick. Otherwise, I am going to put your seatbelt on. All right, here we go. Parks Maintenance Budget Summary. What we have here are the changes from the 11-1 presentation 2018 Personnel Services. What you guys saw on November 1st was the 1.1 million, and we 1.1227 all the way up to the $66,000 change. Basically, what you see here is
use a pointer? I'm not seeing any of the numbers you're mentioning.
The operators, operations manager.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thank you.
66,411 is the operations manager, Brian Kraus. We brought him in December of 2017, so there was a budget amendment that should have occurred, did not, and that's what you're seeing in this slide.
That a portion of his salary was allocated to this.
That is correct. Thank you, Mayor. Portion of the salary. On the services and supplies, what you'll see here is the breakdown of the $161,000 difference that you'll see in these numbers. And you have a multiple accounts under services, including field turf maintenance. We had a couple problems with basketball courts this year. And then, unfortunately, we had 3 trees in the green spaces that fell onto homeowners' properties. So we did not anticipate that, and you'll see some increases there. Utility fees. We like to blame Todd for this because, you know, the utility fees came in March, April of 2017, and when you guys did the budget, we did not know what those numbers were going to be at that time. Landscape maintenance, same thing with NLS. We had the contract start June 1st of 2018, and again, we had some changes in the numbers, so what we're doing is we're reflecting those numbers in the 19 and 20 budget. And then Forterra, that's the Green Snoqualmie support. That started January 1st of 2018 with an agenda bill, and that's Phil's work, and he works with Snoqualmie Tribe, he works with Mountains of Sound Greenway, just several folks, a lot of volunteer hours, REI, and he actually gets a 5-to-1 return on the dollar. So every dollar that we spend, he gets $5 back. He really does a fantastic job. On continuing with parks maintenance, you see in the 2019 year proposed, whoops.
No, wait.
We have, yeah,
Dan,
sorry, I
back up,
hit the
please.
button. Yes, sir.
Councilmember Holloway.
Can we back up? So second bullet, increase to account for the underestimation of utility fees.
Water, sewer, and storm at the utility rate increase that we went through March, April of 2017.
But this is expenditures. Utility fees are this is the money you're paying to utilities for, gotcha, now I understand.
Right.
Never mind, go on.
Okay. And let's see. So this is
for the increases you imposed upon them, yeah.
He imposed upon them.
We're trying to move here, Mayor. All right, so here we go. Parks maintenance, service and supplies, what you'll see in the 2019. Again, you're going to see the aging infrastructure that we have. Ridge is reaching 20 years old. I don't need to tell you guys that. And we are already seeing it from the basketball courts to some of the trees are starting to, there's quite a bit of infrastructure that needs to be maintained, and we're seeing that increase, so we're reflecting that in this budget. The tree removal service, we are looking at putting an actual fund each year to account for trees, just the unknowns. We don't know when the high winds, things are going to happen, and residents are affected by falling trees and any damage that may occur, so we're going to try to capture that in this budget. Again, you'll see the utility fees, NLS, and then Forterra, and that makes up the $231,000 difference you see on this slide. In this, we moved on to 2020, and personnel services, you see the my ops manager, again, you'll see that, and then seasonal staff support. Unfortunately, we struggled this year to find seasonal staff. We were lot of competition out there with the neighboring cities and with what we pay. We did get 2 or 3, I believe, within the Parks Department. What happened was when finance saw that and it was a lower number, they assumed we weren't using it. So all we're doing is putting a correction in there to say we still need the seasonals, we just need to put it back into the budget. So that's what you see here. Services and supplies, you'll see the change here at $254,000. Again, it's the infrastructure and what we're needing for services and what we are seeing as a staff, tree removal, utility service, NLS, and Forterra. So it's a duplication, but again, this is 2020 now. What we have here is the street maintenance budget we're moving on to. And by all means, let me know. I know I'm flying through. I'm trying to get us back up to time here. So let me know if there's anything you need addressed. Street maintenance budget, we have services and supplies. We had a decrease in, we have a negative $404,000. Preventative maintenance, we went from the $600,000 down to the $350,000 that Robert shared with you in his earlier slide. So that $350,000 wasn't what we asked. We were trying, oh, he's not here.
But Dan, sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead, Councilman Lasay.
That's not a decrease from previous year. That's just a decrease in what you proposed.
Exactly.
Correct. The November 1st. And that's what these negatives are based upon what you had at November 1st to what you have now.
That is correct.
Okay, I want to make sure we're clear on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Lasay.
Thank you for asking.
I'm sorry, Councilman May.
So I just want to make sure I understand what I just heard, because we talked a little bit in the preceding presentation about the needs for streets. And we saw a number going out, for a lot of years at about $350,000 a year.
Correct.
So you're the guy that has to get these streets paved over whatever their lifetime is.
Right.
And you've got your 20 years, so you probably know which streets, and you've street condition survey. I know you're good.
Right.
Bottom line, though, when you cut through all of that, are you saying here that 350 isn't a big enough number?
I'm saying in the spring, as Robert indicated, we're going to come back to with our pavement management index, PMI, and that's going to give us a really good roadmap, if you will, pardon the pun, and tell you exactly what we need to do when. And that'll really give us a financial picture. We'll sit down with the finance department and we'll work it out at that time. We'll obviously come back to you or committee, and then we'll bring it to your attention and figure it out together.
So it may be higher than 350, yet to be determined.
Yeah.
You're probably correct on the first statement.
And I think it's a PCI, not a PMI, just so we.
Pavement Management Index?
PCI, Pavement Condition Index.
Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
Just so we don't get confused in acronyms in the future. Councilman Lasay.
So, as a follow-up on
Yes.
what I had said before in terms of that's differences between what you presented in 1st November versus now, the increase, however, is $710,000 from 2018. I'm going way back.
Right
2018. Here. So highlight why, if services and supplies is, these are ongoing things that we already do that we need to do better or spend more money on, where is that $710,000 going?
Absolutely. Let's see here.
And then again, the next year, it's a decrease from 19 to 20, but it is an increase over the trend that we had of previous years by still $600,000.
Correct.
So I guess I'll give the highlights to exactly what's changing between projected 2018 and proposed for 2019. This was presented in the November 1st presentation under kind of the budget summary reconciliation tables that you've seen previously. So the first thing to note is there's a standard 3% increase for a number of different items. In addition to that, the changes beyond the 3% includes an increase for cold patch de-icer, construction materials and supplies. Actually going to need more detail than what's been presented here. So there's also professional services increase. As you guys have been notified, administrative service charges are increasing.
These are all services and supplies?
I mean, several of them are, yeah, pretty much services and supplies.
Yes.
So de-icer is $710,000?
No, but it's a
No.
component.
What is the big number that's getting us to that? What, I mean, it can't be
What are the three or four
1,000
major
paper
items?
cuts. I'm guessing it's not 70 items at $10,000.
No,
It's
what we have is
10
the traffic
70,000.
signal painting you see at Swenson, how it's starting to chip. If you recall, a couple years ago, we went through and did, and that's 140, 160,000. And from Douglas Center and Fairway, we repainted that traffic signal maintenance. So here you'll see at Swenson and the Parkway, we have that as well. You have the NLS contract edition. You have, what was it, the capital outlay, the sign replacement program we have in the capital outlay. Oh, that's
Back up,
capital,
back
not
up.
services and supplies. So,
Dan, if you would back up one.
sure.
Wasn't NLS an increase in parks, not in streets?
It's all the way through the city. We have them in every division. So you'll see the NLS contract affected throughout.
Okay.
What do you mean all the way through the city? What,
Trying to
you mean
understand
specific
Parks,
departments?
streets, facilities.
Stormwater.
Yeah, because if you're maintaining the streets, you got to put it in the streets. If you're doing it in a park,
Right.
you put it in the park.
Exactly.
Got you. Okay.
Yes. Did I hit everything, Brian, or is there anything I left out?
I think Brian Kraus, operations manager, Drew touched on the major components of the difference there. I don't think there's really one large standout item. It's a collection of a number of things that create that change from 2018 to 2019.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I think I'm premature. I'll wait.
Just,
Councilman Losay.
so these are all things that are to maintain current service levels. These are increases, not enhancements.
That is correct. The enhancement, proposed enhancements down below, and then you see the capital outlays.
Can I make the assumption then that we were operating at a deficit in terms of what we had allocated funds previously? Or is that really what this comes down to?
I would say yes, and then you're also seeing the age, just the age of the ridge catching up, and we have to keep up with our maintenance. You can't fall behind.
And again, I know we talked about this before. I want to make sure we hit on it here, so it's
Right, absolutely. Yeah, better to be clear and catch it now.
Okay, that's it.
So what we have here in 2020, you have a negative $274,000, so you have the preventative maintenance for various pavement going from 600 down to 350. Oh, that's the big item. There you go, I left that out. You have accurately reflects the NLS contract again, and then the speed limit signs. We had Councilmember Ross and the mayor attended a conference or a seminar, and they found some speed limit signs that we'd be able to, pardon me?
And Mayhew and Shepherd.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're the two that called me, and they were sending me pictures and things as they were going, so my apologies. But they found some better priced speed limit signs with newer technology. So we're going to be looking at that, and we adjusted our numbers that we were putting in by $8,000. So here, we are going to flip over to the utility. Oh, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Councilman Mayhew.
All right, so, yeah, you went back. So, someone from the finance team, I just want to make sure I correctly understand this. When I look at this slide, and I just look at the totals, like for 19 and 20, am I correct that that is what shows up on, I don't know if you can see it from here, this slide?
The gap slide.
The gap slide, the 10-year forecast streets fund slide, is that what the expenditure line, it's these numbers right here? Kind of looks like it, but I just want to be sure.
Well, I think it's probably most appropriate for the finance director.
Okay, we can hold that question until he gets back, okay, fine.
I would hold that.
Yeah, 1.5, 1.4, and then, yeah, that looks like it has
All right.
and has a 4% increase.
And could you just go back one more? Sorry, could you just give me a second to digest that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the thing that's going through my mind, the question that's going through my mind is how did we get from 809 to 1519? The blue, the the 18 number to that number, because it's about double.
350
But that's
is a
not
big
answered on
key.
this page, right?
No, it's not.
That's the question I asked, and that's the things.
Oh, and
Right,
did you
those
get
are
an
the-
answer?
Yeah. Sorry, what I heard was, there's kind of a general 3% increase. There was an increase in cold patch de-icer and supplies related to winterizing, traffic signal painting, NLS contract adjustments, and street preventative maintenance that hasn't had to be done in the past.
350 is that big ticket item.
350 is that last item?
350, yeah.
That's the big ticket item you'll see in there, and then
Yeah, that percentage is 350.
conglomerate of everything else that's been stated.
Okay, so I am now replaying what I heard, so I'm re-asking the same
That's
question.
okay.
But I didn't understand it.
Better
So
to be clear, so.
I'm fine, I understand the 350. That's, I think, your point on the age is catching up with us.
Right. Traffic signal maintenance at Swenson, that's 140.
Well, no, so well, sorry, go ahead.
The traffic signal maintenance, where we have to repaint the poles at Swenson and Parkway.
Right, and so
NLS
is that,
contract.
and that's, you're going to have to do that every year from now on? Or that's a one-time?
That's a one-time for the signal maintenance. We're trying to, we have to get a hold of that.
Let me just correct you for a second.
Go
So
ahead.
that's in the Snoqualmie Parkway Reconstruction Fund now. It's been moved there.
Oh,
So
that's
not
right.
a part of this.
That's right, you're correct.
Sorry, so which one should we cross out?
The traffic signal.
Traffic signal painting?
So there's a subtraction, right, from the street maintenance fund. That's actually been moved to the Snoqualmie Parkway Fund. Therefore, you see a negative $140,000 taken out of the fiscal year 2019 presentation from the November 1st, 2018
Got
presentation.
it. So that's not one of the items then anymore, since it's been taken out. It's not one of the numbers that gets us from 809 to 1519. Okay. So we've got the 350.
Where's it, the 350?
Is the cold patch de-icer supplies, is that something that will now be every year?
Oh, that's always every year, yes.
Yes,
Did that go up?
right. So we did increase that from, sorry, I'm trying to get to it. So basically, we were projecting for 2018 $32,000. That increased $30,000 to a proposed budget in 2019 of $62,000.
Okay, so we're talking about 30,000 here.
Right.
Bigger numbers than that. Okay. So what's the 3% increase? What's the dollar amount there?
So the 3% increase, the dollar amount is $5,000.
Oh, okay, so I don't care about that one either.
Right.
I mean, I care. It's just not what I'm looking for right now.
Uh-huh. So there
NLS contract? How much is the NLS contract?
64,000?
So the landscape services is increasing approximately $35,000 from 18 to 19.
Okay, so I'm looking for a number of, a total of about 700,000.
Right.
And I've got 350.
We're at 400.
And we're at 400, yeah, we're at 400.
So what I would say is maybe the next time we can bring back to you the budget reconciliation table where you did see everything added up appropriately to the $750,000 number that you're looking for right now.
Thank you.
Councilman Lasay.
Can I ask that we don't do that next time, but we do that before that, so we can see it and not spend time talking about it, so we can spend time.
We can send
I
you an
mean,
email.
I can run upstairs right now and prepare a slide for you to bring
Yeah,
down.
now.
I didn't mean like right now, I just meant, don't send it to us at 4:47 before the meeting, that sort of thing. We just need to have time to deliberate, and if that stuff, if we spend the time asking those questions, we can do that beforehand.
Councilman
I think all
Hall.
we're asking is to
I
see
think-
where it's going, that's all we're asking
Yeah,
to see, do.
I
We're
think
not asking
the
to
lessons learned is
debate it.
when you're talking to me about 2019, my baseline is 2018. Show me the list of the plus ups and plus minuses, the complete list that gets me between those two figures. If you later need to come back and say, here are new items, tack them on the list. Do not bring them as a separate list because it just confuses us. I want to see the whole list at all times. Otherwise, I can't. I've got two different presentations I'm trying to flip between, and it's not making it, guys.
Understood. Okay,
Request.
water division, or water, switching over to utilities now. What we have here is a $350,000 change. Councilmember Mayhew had asked us, this should be a capital, so we listened, and it is. So now you see on the second slide, we moved it into capital outlay. That's the only change that you'll see there. Water Operations Fund, and then sewer. Sewer is, the change you see here is the biosolids hauling. 2018, we made an estimate, and there's a difference of about $58,000. So this is just reflecting the actual numbers we had for biosolids hauling. And the community development has an employee, Nicole Sanders, I believe this is, and that's the share portion, $62.50 that's coming out of sewer. You're going to see here in 2019, the biosolids hauling. The project Phase 2 will be done in May or June of 2019, so you're going to see that disappear shortly. And we have actual funding for manhole maintenance, water reclamation, working with finance. They asked us to reduce it by $10,000, so we did so. And the employee work with community development again, you'll see that at the bottom, which makes up this difference. On the 2020 year, you'll see that 278, it's the double counting that council brought to our attention last time. So we greatly appreciate that. You were right, so we did correct that. Came through, and you see that reflected here. And then again, you see the manhole maintenance, and then again, the community development employee portion. Stormwater, we doing okay? Checking in. We have stormwater operations. What I'm going to do here is I'm probably going to need some assistance from Todd as we go through this. You will see the changes of under budgeting for Vector services, catch basin maintenance, an increase in disposal fees. Again, in 2018, we contract that out. We were making our best guess as to what we were going to use and how much we were going to spend trying to meet the NPDES Phase 2 compliance requirements. And under budgeting for the street sweeping, it's the $150,000 that you see here. And that's completely changed over into stormwater operations. And then again, with the council's request, Stillwater Bog, that's a capital outlay. So we did take that off, and you'll see that on the next slide, I believe, in the capital outlay.
Councilman Wilson.
So just the same thing as, back on, we were on streets. So like we were on streets. Got an increase of about, what do I got there, $600,000 would be, and I appreciate, again, I appreciate the designating the changes from the November presentation to now. That's important to understand that you've sharpened your pencil. A summary to council of where that $600,000 increase is now?
Yes,
absolutely. You summarized it once before, what's now with these fine tunings, would summarize it again. Would be good to have that. And then the question is the capital outlay that you mentioned, the $200,000 capital outlay for the Stillwater Bog. That's just a budget item. That's just, is that a we think it's going to cost $200,000, or is that a just placeholder so that when we do find out how much it costs, we have enough money?
Exactly. Once the engineers get done and we actually have we open the bids, we'll come back to you and we'll actually know what it is. That's a.
So if it's $50,000.
Best engineering, well,
great. Well,
that far off.
Big numbers, but if it's, so if it's 150, great, we got good pricing, everything worked out. They can do it in the summer months when it's, or the drier season of the bog.
Correct, right.
Okay.
This is just, I think, important distinction. You're talking about a enterprise fund capital outlay fund, are you not? Or
for the.
Well, I guess I'd be concerned that if there was revenues from stormwater that were pegged to be spent for a $200,000 replacement of that Stillwater Bog deck.
Right.
And then they shove it over to the capital outlay fund, does that revenue go with it, or now is it mixed in with REIT and other funds that are, what's the revenue paying for that? Are there two different capital, do you have a capital outlay fund, I assume, within your enterprise funds versus another one?
No.
That's more general fund related.
He just moved it to a different row. It's still in the same
Right,
utility.
it's in the
So this-
capital.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
This remains in the stormwater
Right.
operations fund.
Okay, good, thank you.
That's how you're confusing.
I'm watching these guys, I can't watch that.
So to answer your question, Councilmember Lissay, what we did was the Vector truck catch basins, we have about $156,000, $150 for the sweeping, $100,000 for street trees, and we will follow this up and provide it to you. 75% increase in leaf disposal fees, 200,000, nearly 370,000 for the disposal, or 200,000 more than last year for 3,700 cubic yards. And then the outlay, and that's from the 891 and 18 to the 1.5 that you're seeing there. All righty.
Moving on.
Where'd I leave off? Stillwater, okay. So moving on, 2019, our 10-year program of a $250,000 per year tree program. So that's key to there is it's annual program. And then here, engineering support to build the design of the MPDS program. So we're going to have to contract that out with Herrera, and then we're also going to be hiring an employee because we have compliance that we need to be, we need to match, and we need to keep. What did I do, Todd? Yes? Right, it's in the employees of personnel services. And then eliminating the transfer street maintenance fund for street sweeping related to the, we're moving street sweeping into the storm sewer account.
Councilmember Ross.
So I'm not sure where to find it, but I thought, wasn't the street trees replacement, was that 140,000 a year? I didn't know.
250.
It was 250,000?
Yes.
So it's 250 now after the addition of $100,000. So it was, I believe, 150 before. And I'll confirm that for you.
Councilmember Ross, I think I can answer that for you. I think the 140 that you're talking about is the proposed enhancement you see down there in the tan line. That's the $140,000 to support the urban forest program, which will hit a slide later for the enhancement for the $140,000 to help out the urban forestry program to get their forest stewardship plan.
Right, that's what I'm thinking of.
That's,
oh, okay.
that's where
different.
that
Okay,
is.
thank you.
And the other 28 for the 2 other employees.
Okay, thanks.
So here we just show you the Stillwater Bog. We moved it into the capital outlay. And right here for storm sewer in 2020 now, what you see here is the right sizing, the need repair for maintenance services. We have deducted that, took 50,000 out, and then the increase for under budgeting, as we stated before, was the street sweeper, the street trees, the engineering support for MPDS compliance, and then again, street sweeping, eliminating the transfer street maintenance fund for street sweeping and related services. Now we get into facilities maintenance. And recognizing the construction of the police department, the fence.
Oh, sorry.
Are we holding our, are we at the end of the utilities?
Go ahead.
What, should I hold my questions in the presentation? Or?
Actually, what I'd like to do now, we're at a 2-hour mark. I'd like to take a break, give the council, a 5-minute break. You want 10 or 5, council? 5, okay?
5's good.
All right, so let's start again at 7:05 sharp. And then Councilmember Mayhew will start with your question, if that's okay. Councilor Mayhew.
Okay,
Back to that slide,
we
Dan.
go back to this, yeah.
There we go.
So so now we're in a totally different place than we've been in before, where we were talking about governmental type operations. This is our business type, these are our utilities.
Yes.
So our utilities are funded solely and completely by what I call the water rates, but it's the utility rates that we bill out. Because I call it my water bill, but it's actually all three, isn't it?
Utility bill.
Utility bill, yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at
Bond.
our rate study that was done that is the basis on which the rates that we currently charge for utilities.
Yes.
And in the stormwater for 2018, in the rate study, the projected expenses were $1,608,000. So that's pretty close to your 1,638, close enough.
Okay.
But the amount for 19 is 1,480, 1,480,000. So what I'm worried is how will we pay the other 2 million of that 3.164 million?
Is that from the bond, Todd? Bond revenues?
Has to be the has to be the bond, right?
200, possibly 200,000 could come out of the bond because it's capital, but I've got a separate question on that, but that would be the most.
We'll get with finance. We'll have to get back to you.
Well, what I'm worried about is that you're 2 million over what we can actually afford.
So, do you have a page in front of you that you can reference to us?
I do. It's the rate study, page 30.
Does that mention only O&M, or does that include capital as well?
It calls out each separately. It calls out, it says the revenues are expected to be 1.868 million under the new, well, I guess it was under the before increased rates. So, but the expenses, the operating expenses were projected at 1,480. Then there's some debt service, old debt service 179,000, new debt service 194,000, for a total expenses projection for stormwater of 1.853. So the rates, my understanding is we did adopt these proposed rates for 19, so it would seem like that's all we can cover with. So unless we're planning to do a pretty significant rate increase almost immediately, I'm wondering where the money comes from to cover that 19 proposed budget.
Yeah, we can, we'll get with finance. We'll get back to you.
Okay. So, and similar question would be asked about each of the other two utilities. So just
Okay.
matching them up with where's, what's the funding source for it?
Okay.
Thanks. And sorry, let me just go back and just the question I hinted at, the 200,000 for capital outlay.
Yes.
So that's separate. It kind of works differently in the, as you know, in the utilities. But so there's a utilities CIP,
right,
which is paid for partly out of rates and partly out of bond proceeds and potentially future. But the point is, there's utilities, so it plans out what those capital expenditures are in the utilities.
Yes.
My question is that 200,000 in there? Because if it's not in the utility CIP, then that means we're going to need to adjust now if the only adjustment to utility CIP is 200,000, I'm sure you guys can factor that in, and I'm sure that's not going to throw something off that's a 10-year building plan or whatever the length is. But I just want to make sure that your utility CIP captures anything that you think is capital related, and we make sure we haven't really gone.
All right, we'll look at that with a new change as
Okay.
you guys requested, couple weeks ago.
Councilor Lassie.
Yeah, maybe Robert, I'm new at this, and I was under the impression that the increases, which there's some significant increases over all of the utilities from 2018 to 2019, were covered in overall budget numbers that we've seen previously. Now I'm hearing that maybe that's not the case. So I guess if I ask the same, maybe it's the same question. how are we funding these? How are we funding this increase? How do you fund these utility increases? Where does that money come from?
Well, rate increases. So again, you still have 3 years of programmatic rate increases. So the 18 that's going into effect now, the 19 and 20. So those rate increases from consumers and from commercial, of course, contribute to the revenue sources.
So I would like to hear then from, I guess, from your department, what is the rate increase and how much is that if this is considered expenditure, where's the revenue? If the revenue is the rate increase, how much is that for each of these items to know that we have that money?
Yeah, we do have it. Our estimated budget, our estimated latest projections, we're actually working with our rate analysts to update our numbers. Right now, though, our latest estimates for revenue for the 19 budget are 2.35 million in stormwater, 5.656 for sewer, 4.410 for water, and that was the latest estimates given to us by our FCS, our consultant.
So I guess I would like to, I need to see.
We are
that
going
in
over
a
budget
table.
We need to see a full revenue chart as well. I mean, because I'm sure there's general facility charges and other revenue sources we put into play that are not being accounted for. I mean, beyond the, but even at that projection with the analyst you just quoted at 2.5, it still doesn't account for another $500,000 or 600,000. So we'll need to get some revenue, a revenue picture of each of these utilities.
Yeah.
To line up with the expense totals.
Yeah, because if the way we're funding increases are rate increases, that's a whole nother conversation.
Well, this was already determined by the last council that passed the rate increases. You'll get an opportunity to go 21 and beyond.
Well, I'm talking about, what I'm hearing is that the rate increases that the previous council already passed aren't sufficient enough to fund this, is what I'm hearing the fellow council members say. So
That's the concern unless we get a full revenue. We just need a full revenue picture, guys. So let's not try to hack through an answer right now. Let's go back and look at that hard and bring back some hard numbers on that if we could. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions before we move on, Linda? All right.
Facilities maintenance, what you see here is the police station fence is now complete. So we had a 360, now it's 322, so we're just reflecting that actual number. Here we have to, in 2019, we have to put a new roof on the police station. Then ongoing program for regular facility maintenance. We are looking at putting $200,000 a year. We own, between the Public Works Parks Garage, you have the police station, fire station, city hall, old library. So looking at building a fund that we can start in facilities. And then there's just small decreases, miscellaneous at $16,000. This one is fiscal year 2020, and you see that same facility maintenance line item of 200, and then some small miscellaneous cleanup.
Well, question.
Councilman, say.
So the re-roof is not, it's not that we're re-roofing the police station now, you're just starting the fund to be able to do it in the future?
No. We need to put new shingles, new roof, whatever.
How old is that roof?
Ooh, how old is that, Don?
20 years.
20 plus, 21 years?
Yeah.
Two?
Yeah, so.
Okay.
I think the police station was the first new
I'm trying to
facility
think of
built.
two. I mean,
Yeah, it
we've
was
been
the
here
first new
18.
facility built with anticipating the bridge, yeah.
Almost going on 19 years and it was here. So.
Yeah. One of the first structures up there. Councilman Mayhew.
So I'm just, see if I understand this correctly on this $200,000 item. So, is this going to be charged through to the, is this being charged through to the police department in 19? So is that already in the police department operating budget that we previously saw?
That's the 200,000, no.
Yeah, the 200,000 you're asking about, it's 200,000 in 19, 200,000 in 20.
Where's the 200,000 coming from, Dan?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Drew, you want to?
Well, I think we built up a pretty substantial fund balance inside the facilities maintenance fund over the past 2 years, which include transfers into that fund. So if you're trying to match your one-time expenditures,
If
capital
it's fund balance,
expenditures.
if the answer is fund balance, just say that, and I'm very happy. Then I went.
My response at the moment would be fund balance, depending on what I do see in the model.
Okay, so, right.
Robert mentioned that it is fund balance.
Okay, so that's not translating, that 200,000 isn't translating through to a police department operating budget increase. It's coming out of fund balance.
Correct.
So then, if we're going to put 200,000 a year, we could just put 400,000 all at once out of fund, like.
Well, I think what we would want to set up is probably an ongoing capital programs that we can match with a reoccurring revenue source when we get to that, if that makes sense, right?
No, I completely agree with that. I 100% agree with that point. To the extent that we're going to fund it out of fund balance transfers, though, maybe you guys could look at whether you just want to do it all at once rather than sort of trickling it every year. I think it gets confusing as to whether that's like to the thing that you just mentioned, which is actually coming out of. So maybe you guys should just look at that.
I would also mention that there's labor constraints as well. So depending on how much the department can actually handle in a year, $200,000 seems about right now.
Oh, no, I'm not questioning the amount. I'm sure you guys have figured that out. I'm just saying, if it's just fund balance transfers, then we don't have to trickle it out. Let's just do it all at once and fund it. If it's coming from fund balance.
The other item that we're evaluating in 2019 that we need the time to do internally is the allocations from the facility, the charge outs from the facilities maintenance fund to the other departments. Actually, one of the council policies is that this should have full cost recovery. We're not seeing that right now. So we still have to do some internal number crunching to see what we need to do. Do some of the capital improvements that are in here belong in here? Do they belong in a different fund like the capital fund? So there's a lot of other work we have to do on the back end. So right now we'd rather just do an annual budget because we might have to come back on this later on once we, if we have to determine that any changes or recommendations are needed for changes on the facilities maintenance fund.
All right, another thing you could think about is wherever that fund balance is coming from, you could just leave it in that fund, but you could just sort of put a line item that says 400,000 set, for police department roof, or something, sort of tag that there's a need there, but just leave the money where it is for now until you get through that process. Think about it. I'm just throwing out a suggestion, something to think about.
We actually had some internally, so we do have that.
We've got fund balance inside the facilities maintenance fund that we could then use to.
Oh, that's
Have line
so
items.
it's within it. So I'm just getting
Right.
at the more that we're seeing these fund balances moving in little amounts and every year, it sort of starts to get like a plate of spaghetti. It gets hard to follow. So if you could just help us be clear on it, I think it helps us agree with you on what you're doing.
And again, that's why we need to do more internal analysis on some of these funds, especially ER&R plus facilities plus IT. Just make sure that it is easier to follow for everybody, and that the charge outs are correct and everything's correct. And everything's in the right place as far as expenditures as well. So we have some work to do on the back end, and we will be doing that in the next year.
So,
Well, guys, that's facility maintenance, that's expenditure and revenues for facility maintenance. Now I'm gonna take 200,000 of that, I'm gonna put it off on this other thing, and I'm gonna call it facilities maintenance. And to tell you the truth, guys, I'm back to this picture of, eventually I've got a problem on facilities of how big is the picture, but I can solve something. I don't know what that something is, but I can put $200,000 to it. Why do this until you know what you're doing, and why not just leave it in the fund until you do? Third, this is unsustainable if you're just gonna eat on the fund balance for $200,000 a year. Eventually you're going to run out of fund balance. So we need to figure out what's sustainable revenue to support it. You need a complete plan. This is
We have money requesting for a maintenance facility plan. It's going to tell us exactly what we need to do, when we need to do it, and how often. So that's a request.
My suggestion is this action is premature until you have that plan.
Well, as I also just mentioned, we need to look at the charge outs to departments and making sure we are recovering the costs that we need to sustain the plans for facility maintenance.
Now we're moving into ER&R, and I'm going to fall back to Drew on a few of these, but recommended department charges. This is when you look at the departments, you have the 2019-20 budget. This is each department on an annual basis, what they'll be looking at for 19, and then again here in 20. Equipment replace. How do we build this? Personnel services and supplies, and then the capital outlay. Annual total value, vehicle equipment replacement purchases. And what you see here is in 2018, you had 1.2, 19 at 1.9, and then in 2020 at 1.3. Each item itemized out as you see. Changing equipment, replacement, repair to the department, personnel services, multiplied, estimated, and percentages used by those services in the department, and then the budget multiplied by estimated percentage use of those services, supplies.
Okay, slow down, Dan.
Okay. Which one?
It's just that first sub-bullet is quite a chunk to chew through. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. I have a question.
Councilmember Ross, sorry.
On your department charges, it shows police about 400,000, and it's the highest of all the other departments. So does that include the North Bend police vehicles?
No. You see how they're separated? You got Snoqualmie here and then North Bend.
I didn't see that. It's even higher than, it's like
I've been there.
530,000. So what's the 400,000 for then?
The police vehicles, replacing all the police cars, vehicles.
Just
But
as a
we've
quality
been-
service.
So we'll get into
Snoqualmie, I'm sorry,
exactly how we
Snoqualmie,
build
yes.
the charges, especially the annual fixed charges to replace the vehicles. We've got a number of police vehicles that are on a 6-year, I think, replacement cycle, correct? 5-year replacement cycle. We actually have to build up those charges pretty quickly in order to recover, say, the cost of purchasing that vehicle in that outer year.
I
And I
can
believe
explain,
there's-
Dan, I can explain part of the North Bend issue. North Bend did not put in funds for the capital depreciation of their vehicles for the first 5 years of the contract. So if they sign back on, which we expect they will do for starting in early 2019 for 5 years, they'll need 2 years of upfront payments to cover the new vehicles that are not reflected in this.
Oh, so there's to be an additional
Yes.
to the 131,000?
Yes, substantial. It's up around $300,000 over 2 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Dan, I know you're trying to get ahead, but
Right there.
Councilman Lozay.
Back up.
slide number 1, recommended department charges from ER&R, 2019, total of 1.3 million.
Yes.
I go to the next slide, my 2019, I don't see a 1.3 million. How do these relate to each other?
So at this point, I would actually probably ask Dan to move on to slide, I believe, number 4, which discusses the slight deviation between what we would normally purchase every year, and the dollar amounts actually fluctuate in that capital outlay line because we're purchasing vehicles in, say, a batch. You might need 12 vehicles this year, you might need 8 vehicles the next year. They're all different dollar amounts, so you can see that amount fluctuate throughout time. It's very spiky, your capital outlay. However, what we're doing in terms of charging the departments is we're trying to come up with some annual fixed charge that's smooth, right? So that we're not charging the department for that vehicle purchased that year, which would likely result in a significant jump in their expenditures and a significant decrease in their expenditures, but we're trying to smooth out that charge over time to account for that. So there's a difference between how much we're charging the department and the budget itself that we're building into it.
And this,
But over time, it all evens out.
and this is what Drew is referring to right here.
You know, so there's time that fund might grow quite high, and then suddenly it's depleted to very little, and then it builds back up again, and it all depends on those cycles. Part of the challenge with the fleet program, of course, when we have Snoqualmie Ridge, is we got a whole lot of new vehicles all at once that are aging all at the same time. So part of the challenge in the fleet program has been to try and spread those out over several years so they're not coming, these huge spikes, but more frequent spikes spread out further.
So,
Councilor Mayhew.
Sorry, could you go back to that recommended department charges slide?
this one or the first one?
First one, yeah. So what I would find really helpful is to have the 2018 year added to this. So I can see a fair amount of consistency from 19 to 20. Just curious about how consistent this is with 18, so if we could add the 18, that'd be great.
I think you'll find some succeeding slides will explain that. That
Is that
might not be
coming?
very helpful due to
You guys are reading my mind. Nice, nice.
So, get through this.
This clear to everybody?
This clear?
Yeah, so basically, for each vehicle, we're going to need to say purchase a new vehicle maybe in 10 years' time. We're opening up the bucket for that vehicle, and then we're just putting in the same dollar amount each year until we need to purchase that vehicle within that replacement year. So that's what we're doing, and that's why we're smoothing out the charges.
Sorry, I might have misheard that.
Councilor May.
Did you say you're taking, could you just say it again? I'm sorry.
Sorry, so I imagine each vehicle as a bucket. We're kind of also, we're putting the same dollar amount into that bucket each and every year until the replacement year comes, and then we purchase the full value of that vehicle in that year, and we have that money set aside in fund balance, for example, in order to accomplish that.
Yeah, so if you're taking, so say you bought a vehicle today and it's got a 5-year life, and you bought it for 50,000. You're not doing 10,000 a year. You're saying in 5 years it'll cost 75,000 to replace the 50,000, and you're spreading the 75,000 out.
Correct.
So by the time you got there, you've got the money.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
And the impact then on the general fund is just that annual smoothing out of a more equal amount every year rather than suddenly hitting a big spike in year 5. So the purchases are spiky, but the funding is smooth.
So now what we have is the difference between 17-18 budget and 19 budget. And then Drew was going to explain this, this slide.
Well, I think maybe the mayor would like to also assist on this as well. So basically, we had built into the 17-18 budget these initial charges that you see here, about 1.11 million in 2017 and 1.10 million in 2018. However, due to some internal communication issues that we had between, say, finance and management as well, we actually reduced the charges to about $673,000 in 17 and $668,000 in 2018. So these were the amounts that we were charging the departments in 17-18. As a result of that, that's why you see the significant increase between the 18 budget and the 19 budget, is we're trying to get back to kind of a normal status where we're accruing appropriately the annual fixed charges that we need in order to replace these vehicles.
Keep going, Dan.
I don't know if that
Yeah,
addresses
I'm
your
trying to
question,
let it
Councilor May.
digest. Sorry. Vehicle value equipment replacements, done as total. It's $7.1 million. How much should the city be setting aside to replace vehicles, equipment in the future for 2018? And then how does the set-aside amount compare to the balance in the equipment replacement repair fund? Difference between the two, set aside, 57,000 or 1.7%. So you can see that here. 3.43 versus 3.49.
You guys can wrap up. Councilor May, you had a question. I don't know if you want to take it now or finish what you're saying here.
Well, I think the point of this slide is to say, well, even though that we made this mistake for the past 2-year period, we're actually pretty much aligned with where we needed to be at this point, largely, I think, because we haven't purchased the vehicles that we may have needed to this year, for example. So the point is, we're pretty much okay. The mistake that we made over the past 2 years hasn't really resulted in any kind of substantial damage financially to the city as a result of this.
Other than the fact that we have to get the annual funding back to where it was in this biennium, as it were, was it a couple of years ago? Councilor Mayhew.
So my question just got much more complex. If you could go back a slide. So what I was going to ask you is, because I'm just looking at the, let's take the 18 budget 1106, go, yeah. And then we go to the 19 budget 1329, down bottom left. I was just thinking, wow, that's a pretty big increase for 1 year. But then I thought to myself, and what my question was going to be, is that just because you're having to make up for too low an amount in 18, so now the future amounts are actually, you had to bump up? But then you just said that we were actually okay, which would mean that isn't the reason. So I'm just trying to zero in on, it's a two-part question. I'm trying to zero in on why we go from 1106,533 to 1329. It's a big increase. And I see from 20 that so we're not trying to make it all up in 1 year. We've just got a big nut to catch. I'm just trying to figure out why it goes up so much. And
I got it.
Councilmember Holloway?
Take a shot. Okay. 2017, we should have been charging $1.1 million.
Yep.
We were charging 6.67, so we're about $400,000 short. Same thing, we're about $400,000 short in 2018. If you take that $400,000 and add it back into 2017, you almost come up with what is in 2019 of 1.3 and 1. They're trying to make that biennial shortfall up in a biennial, and that's why it jumps.
so that's what I thought.
$400,000 a year.
That's exactly what I did.
Did I get?
Hold on, wait, hold
Wait a
on.
minute, I'm gonna see if I get what my grade is.
No, don't answer.
Was I close?
Don't step
Not
in the
gonna
trap.
answer yet.
Don't step in the trap. Hold on. That's exactly what I was going to ask them. That's exactly the math I did in my head. But then they went to the next slide and they said something that blows it up, I think. So what they said here was, I think it was here, despite the fact that we undercharged for 2 years, we're okay. If they're okay, then why do they have to increase?
We're okay for the biannual expenditures. We will almost empty out the fund balance, and you don't want to do that.
That would mean we would buy 60 vehicles this year.
Well, there's.
We're going to buy 60 vehicles this year.
I just want to see your record.
Okay, so thank you very much for that.
We
Well,
do have
Drew, I
quite a
think
bit of
I
makeup
think the
to
answer to
do.
the question, I don't think she's saying we're okay, but the
Well-
number didn't have to go way north of where it was in 18 by like 200,000 or 300,000 in order to correct the problem.
No, I get the
It
question that they're
went slight-
asking
it
for
went
the most
slightly
part.
north of,
So it's slightly more.
we got,
I mean-
let's stop and have one conversation at a time.
Right, I'm sorry, we're still trying to. So
Just say it loud so everybody can hear your
Okay, the
conversation.
green section is not expected expenditures. It's the fund balance they should have
Right,
To be on track with the plan.
at
yes.
at the beginning of 2019?
October 2018, that's how much money we're essentially allocating this fixed charge per period, and that period is per month. So,
I am unworthy, I'm catching up with your question now, which is,
Everyone heard that, right? Did we get that on tape?
Yes.
if the fund balance is where I need it, why do I need to recoup that $400,000 a year that I'm short?
That's my question.
That's why I said I'm unworthy, I'm caught up.
Is there an echo in there?
so if we can go back to that previous slide, Dan.
What's that?
Yeah, the overall needs, you're going to see, there's a slide coming. So 19, we had this, 20, we had this. Here's the
Go faster.
backup. There's the backup that we have not been purchasing. Don's in need of this from the prior years. So to answer I know Robert's asked me for the 5 years, but right here is where you see 12 and 19 and 8 and 20. And the 29 is that number that's we need to catch up. I mean, that's because we haven't, from the 3/4 ton pickups and everything that we came to you guys, and we're trying to figure out how to work through this. That's what we need to work on and what we need to do. So.
So that, I could understand that, but then that doesn't equal the statement that we're okay on the fund balance. That equals a statement that we're behind on the fund balance.
Yeah, we charge in the rear. So.
Gotta come up with a better term than that.
Then why do you have a fund balance at all? You set aside ahead is what you told us.
You see here, it's 1.1 in the 12 and 400, or call it 5. I mean, just do that math.
You know you're moving too fast for us,
Going
right?
way too fast, Dan. Sorry.
1.1.
Wait, stop.
Just point with the laser, Dan, you say a number, but you're not pointing.
1.1 with the
Wait, so hang
12.
on. You're expecting a $1.1 million expenditure in 2019 for vehicle replacements?
And
For
then you
12
have
vehicles.
443
Didn't hear yes.
For 8 vehicles.
for
in
8 and 20.
2020.
And then we need to come to you and figure out at committee level how we're going to make this work. We don't have that answer yet. We need to
Well,
collectively come together,
Hang on.
figure out
Just
how to make this happen.
Two separate questions.
Why isn't that in?
Stop right there. 1.1, go to the next one. 400,000, so I'm at 1.5, 1.6 million dollars for vehicle replacement in the next biennium.
Right.
You have a ending fund balance of upwards of $3.5 million,
Yes.
okay? So if I even try to balance it out, go up a slide.
So up a slide.
Oh, keep going. Where's the one that says 17, 18, 19, 20, what we charge?
Oh, that one.
Unless you're telling me this is a valley year for our expenditures, I'm still collecting more. I'm collecting $2.7 million in charges for a $1.6 million expenditure with a fund balance of $3.5 million.
Explain the total, Dan. It's not just purchases. It's depreciation.
Depreciation, Don has to do parts,
Maintenance,
services, repairs. I mean, all of that is taken into account in that fund.
Council. Don, why don't you come up to the microphone? Councilmember Ross.
So why don't you have the 29 vehicles in the budget then?
We don't have that answer yet for you. We need to figure that out. We know we have the need. We're trying to figure out how to come to you without saying we need 60 vehicles. We need to figure out what to do.
Hang on, Don.
Dan,
So it might be less
it's
than-
in the budget. You need to explain where it is and why it hasn't been programmed in. It's on the list. Every one of those vehicles should be on the list. That's why I think
The
we should-
29 vehicles?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in the budget. It's there. We just haven't, when we came to you,
It's not the budget, it's the program list, the R&R.
right, in the ER&R program list. It's in there. It needs, Don has vehicles that are expired in years. They're expired in usage. And we came to you guys and we're trying to figure out how to come to you with with the 6 3/4 ton vehicles. We're trying to say, we have the need, it's there, the money is there, and we're trying to figure out how to assess that 29 vehicles on top of the, whatever it was, 12.
So where
12
is
and
the 20, where is the budget then for the 29 vehicles? It's like 1.5 million. So is it in 2018 then? Is that what we're saying?
part of the $7.1 million that you see for total purchase of all vehicles, equipment, future value.
I think she means in revenue or reserves, or capacity to.
Doesn't it have to be in the budget? If we need 29 cars, shouldn't it be in the budget?
Over
I'm not
time.
hearing it's cars, it's
Over time.
equipment.
Well, they're
Let me-
saying
let
that
me-
we're already late on those.
So it's several $1 million, the whole fleet's worth $7 million. I think the analysis is suggesting about a $3.5 million, if we can maintain about
Part of
$3.5 million,
this.
that allows us to
Part of this right
you know,
here.
keep up with replacement on an annual basis.
It's part of this right here.
Yeah, explain it's a replacement schedule.
Part,
Replacement schedule.
It's just like a capital facilities plan.
Right,
It's got years going
it's
out,
got,
10 years.
like
and it's
police
got-
vehicles, they got 5 years. It's, the dump trucks have a 20-year life. It's just part of a replacement vehicle, so on an annual basis, Don takes that, takes the vehicle, he spreads it out over that time frame, whatever it is, depending on the piece of equipment, and that's the money that's set aside. So,
Well, so out of that fund balance that we have, you're saying we're going to fund the 29 vehicles out of that, so it won't have to be in the budget for 2019 and 2020?
So we would have to make an appropriation for any vehicles on this list in the budget. Basically, these 29 vehicles are still listed in the replacement schedule, something that's past due right now. So we haven't moved that into the budget at all. What you see is the $1.11 million that is listed in the previous slide for those 12 vehicles. We can add, in addition to that, the 29 vehicles. We've collected sufficient revenue or fixed charges over time in order to afford, I believe, those vehicles at this point, even though every year there's inflation factors on top of that. So every year that we don't replace it, we've got to keep that in mind too, that there's possibly some additional charges associated with that.
Councilmember Holloway, you've been
But
patiently
it's
waiting.
not in the
Well,
budget.
so, yeah, I'm going to go back up to that other chart, going up, the 2017, 2018, coulda, woulda, and then 19 proposed. No, keep going. So I guess I'm going to come at it a different way.
which one you looking for?
Keep going, non-equipment, still vehicle. So we had the 2017, what we should have charged, that one.
That right there, 3 boxes. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess your prior statement on the next chart, don't move it though. I guess you haven't convinced me that I need to make up the $400,000 a year if I think the fund balance is healthy and it's of no impact. So my question is, on the proposed 2019-2020 budget, what would those figures be without the replenishment catch-up on equipment replacement? And how can you show me that we messed up, but it's okay, everything balances out anyway? How do you show me that's not a true statement?
Well, it's not like.
You're saying, how do we show you this with the 57,000 at 1.7? Let's see.
So if I took on that prior chart, there was about an $800,000 underfund.
Yep.
If I just said, you don't get it, you're down $800,000 in 2019, moving forward, we're not going to go try and recoup that money because either through efficiencies, whatever, you've managed it, your ending fund balance is healthy. What does that do to you if you go to those other charts, instead of 1.2, you're at $800,000 a year?
So we have a couple, Councilmember Hall, we have a couple caveats here. One of the caveats is the ladder truck, or at least the engine replacement. We don't have a full recovery on that because it expired sooner than it was supposed to on the replacement schedule. And so that would dig into fund balance a little bit. We also have, the sweeper that was purchased that would have to be replaced in the future. That's also 2023. So that's coming up as well. So we have some needs that are not completely built into what was being allocated before. So some of the recoup, some of what we're doing to increase is make sure we're getting ahead of the curve on those items that were not identified. And at the same time, Don has identified vehicles that were not on the replacement schedule to begin with. So we think we're understating actually what the need is. And that's the reason for the trying to get it back to where we were as far as building up the fund balance more to identify the equipment that was on that schedule that needs to be replaced as well.
And that's an appropriate argument to make as an enhancement argument for and on. I bought a sweeper for, I don't remember, $4 million, nice sweeper. And I want to replace it in 7 years, divide that out, and that needs to be in addition to the budget moving forward.
We can break it out as an enhancement.
Okay, but that's still not recouping the $400,000 under fund. That's just putting the new vehicles in the plan.
And we can do that.
Okay, but that's not what was shown. The shown was I did a $400 deficit and I'm trying to recoup that. So I agree with your argument, but that's a separate argument from the discussion we're having.
So it seems to me that from our conversations earlier, guys, that the analysis said, hey, if we could get to about $3.4 million, or half of the value of the total fleet, we're in pretty good shape to keep up with replacements on those spiky levels. If we dip below that, we're in trouble. If we go much higher, that's probably too much. To Councilmember Holloway's question, and Councilmember May, what they were saying is, we took too much out and put into facilities during this 17-18 biennium. Cumulative, that was about a $400,000 loss a year that didn't go into that reserve fund. So you would have expected it to drop from 3.4 way down. Yeah, we're going back up to kind of replenish it, but I guess I'm sharing the concern, if you guys could answer that, was the fact that we didn't execute or didn't purchase those 29 vehicles give this false impression that, hey, we didn't lose as much ground as we thought we had. I mean, is that the source of maybe making it seem like?
No, the need is still there. We have like the two large dump trucks, the plow trucks that we have.
Right.
I mean, those are 20 plus, where'd you go, 20 plus years old, at least. 21 years old.
I'm asking the opposite, Dan. Are we, how confident are we that the 3.4 is okay if maybe the fact we didn't purchase 29 vehicles over and above the 20 that were already in the budget? Maybe that's what's given the sense that we didn't lose as much ground as we thought we would. We're catching up to where we need to be pretty quickly here. I mean, if you put those 29 vehicles in the next 2 or 3 year period, because by expired, it doesn't mean that they're failed or the engines have broke down, they're not working anymore. It means it's expired purely by a somewhat arbitrary.
It's an estimate of the life of the vehicle.
Maintenance is going to be
lifetime that we
though.
put on it. Instead, at this point, we want to transfer our vehicles out.
You have maintenance that's going to be increased on it, and that's what Don's feeling
Right.
with his crew.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that may or may not be very much.
Drew, I don't know if you understand, there's a lot of questions flying around. If it makes any sense, if you have anything to add to it,
I mean, I think those answers provided for the most part. I mean,
Questions anymore?
it just seems like the conversation is creating more questions.
all right.
Clarification.
So here, let me try to resolve this.
So how much are you putting in the budget for 2000?
So as of right now, for 2019, what we had budgeted for vehicle purchase is 1.12 million. I think getting back to the initial question provided by both Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Holloway, going back to, if you can go back one more slide, Dan. So I don't know if we said that the 17-18 budget and 2018 budget, the first table was correct. If I did, we apologize. It's the initial charges that we provided. So there is probably a step up that we need to incorporate that if we were doing this the right way back in 17-18. Part of the problem is if you go back to 2 slides, Dan. One more. There you go. That formula wasn't necessarily applied in 17-18. Basically, what happened during that time period is we took the total vehicle purchase for 17 and 18 and divided that by 2, and then that became the annual fixed charge. We've modified that formula to go back to what it should be, which is that formula, and therefore, my impression, the difference, or at least portion of that difference that you see between the 18 budget and the 19 budget is a result of fixing that formula in the model. Now, additional components to that could be that we did replace a few vehicles, and therefore the purchase price in the future, we've had to account for the additional increase in the annual fixed charge as a result of that. But generally, I think that's hopefully satisfies that question.
Now, is that a deviation or a variance?
Can we just go forward 2 slides?
Councilor May.
Sorry. Someone was making weird jokes, and so I just started talking.
This one? Or which one?
Oh, sorry, one more. Yeah. So if I'm getting this now right, what we're saying is, truth is, those 17, 18 initial numbers weren't probably good numbers either. They were
It should probably
too
be a
low.
little bit higher,
They
right?
should have been higher.
Right.
And so what I think at least two of us, certainly what I've been trying to do is understand how you get from this 1.1 sort of ish number up to 1.3, 1.4 number. And the answer is I'm trying to do something that's probably not what I should be trying to do, because 1.1 really wasn't a good number to start with anyway.
That number was never budgeted.
So, big picture, we, not intentionally, but we fooled ourselves. We thought we were putting enough money into this fund, and we weren't. And so now we've gone back and said, hey, whoops, let's get this right.
Correct.
And let's see how much we really need to put in there. And that's what you're coming to us with and saying, sorry, guys, this is what it's going to take to actually keep this fund healthy.
Correct.
And this is why this is what explains when you looked at all those general funds, why those numbers popped up so high in every one of the departments on the fleet charges, those charges to each department.
So, can I ask?
Councilmember Ross.
So can you go to the slide that's for 2019, shows 12 cars or vehicles? Okay, so right there you have the total is $1.1 million, right?
Yes.
And if you go to the next slide, you're talking about replacing 8 vehicles for about $440,000.
Right.
If you go to the next slide, you got these old vehicles you're going to have to replace, but it's not in your 2019 or 2020.
Right, this is the one I said we got to come back to you, and we have to figure this out, and we got to come back to you on how we're going to handle this.
During our sessions within the next couple of days?
No.
Because otherwise, you're not going to budget for it,
No.
and they can't be replaced in the next 2 years. if
We'll
we're gonna
figure it
follow
out
our
within the
budget.
next 24 months, how we're going to handle this, what we're going to do. We're going to look at it collectively as to how we're going to sit down with Don and say, what is it you need to get through? What's the condition? What type of maintenance are we looking at? And we'll come up with a plan, and it'll come forward to you guys.
I think, didn't Don just say that, like, 2 of the trucks are about 20 years old?
Our dump trucks, our plow trucks, yeah.
They're in that?
Yes.
So wouldn't we need to replace them sooner than maybe 2 to 3 years? I mean, I'm just wondering if we need to, I'm saying that this budget maybe is probably
Up to you.
too little. I think we need more.
Just a maintenance, it's just maintenance on Don. So, I mean, we use them for plowing, so the minimal time frame you look at it during an annual time period.
Then those are very important trucks.
They are, just like our 3/4 tons are with the plows.
Bring them out when it snows. They don't get a lot of use.
Correct,
But you do other things with them than just,
yes.
yeah.
So, or Councilmember Say, because if I could just add a question or comment on top of Councilmember Ross, and I'll get to you. I thought where you were going with that, Councilmember Ross, was to basically add up all those up, just say, hey, if the council just decided, you know what, we got to stop dithering around, let's just in the next 2 year cycle, get all those vehicles taken care of. All 49 of them. That totals up, I'm just doing the quick math, 1.1.
3 million,
Just slightly north of 3 million.
right.
The fund balance that you're after, which is on that slide 48, page 24,
It's
is,
3.4.
3.5 million. So you still have $300,000 left over. Then the big $1 million question is beyond that 2 year window, Don, and that's the plan you want to get to, is what's hanging out there in 2021, 22, 23 that,
But you're adding 1.3.
The ladder truck.
yeah, but we're at 1.3, so we quickly replenish it, and that's what I think is getting back to Drew's comment that we think we're okay even with all of that facing us. Is that, am I getting to the
Yeah,
heart?
yes,
Okay.
that's my perspective right now.
Does that make sense to everybody? Councilman Say?
You said something there, and maybe I'm borrowing from other council members, but I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You said that you're going to get back to us for the next 24 months on a plan.
Well, we don't know. We're going to sit down, we're going to reconvene, see what it is out of the 29 vehicles. We already know the 12 and the 8. There's 20 vehicles that are in the plan that we already have some money set aside, and we're going to be purchasing, bringing to you. And then the 29 vehicles we're going to bring back to you, because like Councilmember Holloway said, some of the vehicles, they're pretty sporadic of when we use them. And we can see what we can do to make them last.
So you're not going to ask for $1.19 million? 1.119, 1119718.
These 12?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
But you just said you're going to
These
give,
8, we are.
It's the
There's another
29.
29.
One in 19, one in 20.
29, we're going to
Beyond
sit
that.
down, we're going to try to figure out what it is we need to do and how we can accommodate that. We may come back to you with a large number out of that 29. So we're going to take a look at them, a good hard look at them.
In other words, a large number that will add to that 2019 number or the 2020 number.
when,
Correct.
though? Because if we're starting deliberations on this stuff, when? Because it's,
Well, the money is there. It's there. So
Okay.
it's
Is that
just a
re-
matter of getting approval from you guys to come through and get authorization to purchase.
but the,
Not budgeted.
Right, so,
Correct.
right.
You'd have to do a budget.
Which I think it's going to, go ahead, Councilman.
I'm trying to get, I understand that there's fund balance,
Right.
but without a revenue to replenish the fund balance, all you're doing is spending.
But
And-
in 2019, you're getting $1.34 million. It's replenishing
You're
very,
charging
very
those
quickly.
departments cumulatively $1.3 million.
When you look at the, which slide?
I mean, yeah, I understand that this is the department, the middleman department.
2.6, 2.7, whatever
Paper
that is, in
bag
a
handed off to
24-month
somebody
period.
else.
The what?
It's the guy with the paper bag that hands off the money to somebody else. I get it.
It's $2.7 million in a
Bad analogy,
24-month
but-
period. You replenish pretty quickly.
It's borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. isn't it?
Yeah. Gonna break Paul's legs if he doesn't pay it back, but I get it.
Were you just in New York?
Yeah, it was. Had a great ride through Brooklyn, let me tell you, I'll tell you about it. Let me tell you about it.
I mean, it's general,
I'm just trying to get how we
fund
are
it.
funding this,
It's general fund revenue that goes into each department.
right?
Well, it-
General fund, account, all the funds,
It's all of it, yeah.
Yeah.
All the departments.
yeah.
utilities,
Right.
everybody.
Right,
Yeah.
everybody pays. That's where the 2.7 is in the next 24 months. is
So I
gonna
shouldn't be concerned that the 2008 to 2009 capital outlay is increased by $1 million. Is that what you're trying to say? When I look at the repair and replacement budget summary,
This one here?
capital outlay line, are you telling me that I shouldn't be worried that we're increasing it year on year by $1 million?
Well, I mean, essentially, for us, the answer is yes. If we were to go back to the graph that we
Go back to
provided,
the-
you can
go back-
actually see
that's
it
a great-
fluctuate up and down, up
Yeah,
and
great.
down.
That's the spiky part of the
I
graph.
understand.
That's the that's when Don's buying a vehicle. It's sort of irrelevant to that smooth part where you're charging.
Isn't the purpose of this getting away from the spiky is not to charge $1.19 million, but to do it balanced?
Those aren't charges, those are expenses.
Or expensive, and
The expenditure's always going to spike.
Yeah, so when you're spending,
Expenditures do blue, the revenue does green.
right.
The charges do green.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna back out of the conversation because I'm just not understanding it, and maybe I'll.
No.
A little
And
more
this
info
is,
will give me
I think it's really
good
important that,
questions.
yeah, it's a great question, Councilman Osei, and I would really want you to understand it, and I think we can get there. Councilmember Ross? I mean, in fact, I anticipated when we ran through some of this earlier that, I said, I thought it was brilliant the way they could put some of the slides together, that it's super important to be able to attach what that graph means to some of those slides. Which ones are smoothing the revenues and which ones are spiky expenditures? Which ones are charges to departments, which ones are Don purchasing vehicles? The spiky is the purchases of vehicles, the smooth is the charges annually to the departments and the total charge to the departments.
Because, yeah, I guess it's because I'm not seeing that capital outlay smoothing out at a annual fixed charge that's consistent.
But when you say capital outlay, you mean the purchases?
Yes.
And that will never smooth,
It'll always do blue.
because you'll always have 10 vehicles or 15 vehicles one year and then 3 the
The
next.
blue line
and-
is that
And
purchase.
I mean,
then
for
what's the
example, we
purpose of the green
grew
line?
quickly in a short period of time, for example, and therefore, in order to support the city and our Parks Department, Fire Department, Police Department, we need to purchase a lot of vehicles rapidly in order to provide the level of service needed. Now, those vehicles are likely coming due, for example, in 2018, all at the same time. And so we've put money away year after year after year to reach this point so that we're able to then purchase those vehicles with the fund balance that we currently have on hand.
And that green line you just asked, that is the 1.3, 1.4 million per year. So that's the level number that you're seeing, and that's where the 2.7, I believe I just said, will come over in the next 2 years.
Perhaps I might be able to help.
Councilor Mayhew, Councilor Ross.
I don't know if, oh, were you first?
I think I was.
Go ahead, Councilor Ross. She was first.
So this is just the ER&R. If we looked at like the parks budget, for instance, or even the police budget, are we going to see we need 4 cars and police for the budget there, and then it rolls up to the ER&R? Or is all your budget for the vehicles only in this and not in the individual departments?
No, they're all right. They're all right.
Only in this fund.
Okay, it's only
All
here,
right
so it's
here.
not going to roll up from
No.
different departments?
No,
Okay.
they're all right here.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Mayhew.
So see, maybe, could you go to the total
graph.
department slide?
The graph?
Which one?
The total department slide?
Oh.
Is it, I don't know which direction is for here. Go. So when it has your 3 type, go forward, yeah. Or your 3 types of expenses, you have capital, you have some repair, person. Yeah, that one. Is that it? Yeah. Yeah. So this is this wackadoodle thing, and I hope I'm not explaining something you already understand, in which case forgive me, but with these internal service funds, what happens is there's a separate fund completely away from all of the stuff we've been looking at. We've been getting these police department budgets and fire department budgets and et cetera, administration departments. In each one of those departments, there's an expense for ER&R. And it's, can you go to where your charge out is?
The slide that shows all the departments and how much each of them is paying.
That's not it. It's clear at the front.
The one that had both years on it. The one that had both years on it.
That must have been first slide.
There we
Yeah.
go. That's it.
So this is what they, so in those departments have an expense that's equal to that amount. And then this fund has a revenue exactly equal. So then what happens with this revenue that comes, so that number is this, you see it, it's a fairly flat, or not flat's not the word, but a fairly steady charge out rate if they've done it right. So that what happens is when we're all trying to approve departmental budgets for police and fire, we get a predictable expense that makes sense and that those department heads can manage. They trust this ER&R group's going to replace their vehicles on time, and they don't have to get into the details. They pay just a set amount every year. But over in this other fund now, they get this revenue in, but their expenses are spiky. They're wackadoodle. So let's go to their expense.
Well, if you could stop there for a moment, just to emphasize again to what you're saying, that you can see 1.3, or Councilman will say 1.3, you know, if it wasn't for the anomaly, it would have been like 1.1, 1.3, 1.398. That's where the smooth is. That's the green line on the chart. Where the smooth is, we're trying to have the impact on the general fund. When you're allocating monies every year, we don't want the general fund get whipsawed up and down with those costs. So by creating an internal rental car department, you charge a standard, just a steady fee every year that basically builds up a reserve in that fleet. And then Don has that reserve that he can use for purchases, and the purchases will spike from year to year. So his purchases will spike up and down depending on how many vehicles he buys on any given year, but it doesn't impact the general fund as a whole because it's been coming out of a steady reserve.
So his charges will go
to the fleet.
Wackadoodle.
Wackadoodle.
Right.
His charge will be up, but the department will have more of a steady,
bingo,
equal.
Yes.
All right, you got me.
Got it.
The department's in the general fund. So the impact of the wackadoodle.
Pay for it.
Yeah, so the spikiness impact is just to the fleet department, but it's got a reserve to buttress those impacts.
Got it. Okay.
So, and that's the point.
Which
So
is the $3.5 million.
So that is then reflected in each of the department's budgets as far
Yes.
as what those, whether they're capital outlay charges or something, or services and supplies, wherever it falls.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
Following.
And the reason why you're seeing all those charges in the departments bump up so high in the biennium budget we're proposing is because we're correcting that we dropped that too low, and now we're trying to get it back to where it needs to be. Does that all make sense now?
Yes, because this ER&R is a net zero.
Over time.
Over time is a net zero because it's, there's an expense, but it's being charged to the department's paying through their budget.
Yeah, we're trying to get the reserve as close as possible to smoothing out the spikes or to where the overall fleet value.
I was going to use the example of thinking of your kids and the college fund. All during the years they're growing up, you keep chucking money away to that
Into your
529
GET
fund,
account, yeah.
right? You just keep putting money away, putting money, and then they go to college and you draw it all down. But you don't have to pay for it all in those 4 years they're in college or 6 years. I don't know how, your kids are probably smart enough to do them 4, I don't know. But so it's the same kind of deal. But here's the problem though, if you go to the expense page that has the expenditures on it, with respect to this, the one that has all three of them, I guess, yeah. So, whoop, no, you're there, yeah. So I think the point that my fellow council member was making is that this is your appropriation. So if we approve this request for appropriation, what that means is the vehicles you can buy in the next biennium equal about little over 1.5 million. That's it. You can't come back and say, I want some of those 29 vehicles, because that's what we've appropriated. That's all you'll have appropriation for, unless you're asking us for additional appropriation, which is, just understand that's a more complex request than just asking to spend something we already appropriated.
I'm surprised it took you that long to answer that question. I've been waiting for that one. I was going to ask Bob would that be a budget amendment or a new appropriation if we wanted to add the other additional vehicles? Or?
Well, but if it's in the fund, it's appropriated because it's part of the budget.
No,
so
this year we're only appropriating the expenditures, not the full fund balance.
Well, so the ordinance is going to have to say something to that effect. I mean, it's not as currently drafted.
As currently drafted, it appropriates the entire fund balance?
No, well, we have an ending fund balance on there.
But
we're appropriating an ending fund balance, estimated ending fund balance.
Just the expenditure.
We'll talk later.
Double check for us, because we need to get to the bottom.
Well, maybe to come in.
I think it's just the expenditure.
Typically, with absent the unusual circumstances that on the replacement insurance proceeds that I emailed about earlier, typically there are other council decisions that are needed before those expenditures get made, apart from the question of whether the money has been appropriated for the purpose in the fund.
Exactly the point I was trying to get at. So what I'm getting at here is to spend that 1.5 million, they'll need a majority vote from council approving their expenditure. Is that agreed? Because of our requirement that each contract over 10,000 gets approved? Or am I wrong?
Well, for equipment, it would typically be the purchase needs to go out to bid, or it's purchased off the state vehicle. And before those decisions are made, the department comes to the council to approve replacing the vehicle on this schedule. That's what's
that's my point. And that vote by...
It's not an appropriation decision as much as it is a council replacement.
Exactly.
Decision.
That's exactly my point. And that just requires a majority of council to approve.
Correct.
What I'm getting at here is, let's say they decide to go beyond this and get into some of those 29 vehicles. So they're going to spend more than 1.5 million. They want to spend, sake of discussion, 1.8 million or 2 million. Okay?
Or 3.
Anything. I tried to make 2 million sound like it was really a lot, and probably, okay, never mind. So 1.5 million, if they want to go and spend more than 1.5 in the biennium, then they're actually going to have to increase the appropriation. And so the question I'm getting at is that going to be more than just a majority vote to do that? And so therefore, should they just think real hard over the next week or two about whether they want to put some of those 29 vehicles in here, because otherwise it's going to be more difficult to do that, or are you not worried about that?
I think I need to see what they're about how they're talking about showing that in the budget that you adopt. Typically, even, an ending fund balance that's shown is part of an appropriation when the budget's approved, because the entire biennial budget is an appropriation. Typically, that would be appropriated and wouldn't be subject to future absent some direction in the ordinance. So that's what I want to talk to Robert about, what the document looks like, to answer that question.
I mean, I'm glad the conversation went there, because that's the question I have too, is that it seems to me the council's wishes would be to have some latitude to be able to address those 29 vehicles in the next 2 years.
Well,
If
which
we
we
have the
still
cap-
will
if we have
have
the
even
capacity.
under the thing I'm worried about. It just makes it a
I'll
little
get you,
harder
Brian,
for
first.
us. What's that?
Brian's been patiently waiting. I need to shut up. Brian, go ahead. Councilmember Holloway.
Well, you should reward me when I actually behave myself.
Yeah, no, you're doing fantastic.
Okay. All right, just bear with me a little bit. So I'm gonna focus on 2019 for a second. Your collection from the other departments is 1.329 million. Your cost in 2019 for personal services and supplies, which I will associate to maintenance and other things like that, is about $800,000. So that gives you about, that you're collecting $500,000.
1.9.
No, that's expenditures. Told you, I'm on the revenue side. I'll get back to that. You're collecting $500,000 a year for capital equipment replacement, which kind of amazingly fits this chart pretty good. The problem I get from there, though, is that if I add the figures of expenditures you're expecting, and as you appropriately said, that's about $7 million, but you will only collect $6.7 million in equipment replacement. If you add that 29, you're still eating to your fund even before you bring in the 29 you're eating to your ending fund balance before you bring those 29 other vehicles in. So
Total, if I'm not mistaken, the 12.8 and 29 were about 3 million, if I added that up right.
well, wait, were those 29 vehicles in this chart here?
Oh.
Right, the total of the cost of all the vehicles is 3 million, but it doesn't include your,
No, it wasn't included in
No,
that chart.
it's not. I don't see it
So
in there.
that's 3 million on top of the 7 million that's represented here.
Well, this is
So you're talking
2024.
$10 million. You, at the end of this, you'll be close to a zero fund balance.
Well, it's 1.5 million for the 29 vehicles is 1.5 million, right?
Right. And I don't see that here.
That's $7 million on the chart, that's what you're asking.
I'm just concerned the math's not working out, that it's not replenishing itself. Now I went the other way after I did some math. I'm worried that you're not collecting funds to actually adequately replenish.
You suggesting there's $7 million of expenditures on that chart right there?
If you add those up.
That wouldn't seem possible that you'd replace the entire fleet in a
Right,
5-year
that's
time
100% replacement.
Councilmember Holloway, the entire fleet is worth just
Yeah.
north of $7 million.
That's $7 million.
I add that up and it's 4.24 million.
Oh, I'm sorry. Correct. Where did I get the other 3.34? That adds up to around 3 million, 3.34 million, and there was another 3.34 million, which may be your
That was the
29 vehicles. Where did that go? What was your cost on the 29 outstanding vehicles?
1.5 million.
1.5 million.
3.4 did you get from here?
Yeah, all right, I probably picked the wrong one. Never mind, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
One for Drew.
Wrap it up, Dan?
Fire engine.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Shepherd.
Finally, jeez.
Well, how long have you been home? I just see you behind Jody, I guess.
Called me a long time ago, and I've been waiting.
Well, just say I have a Councilmember Ross will do that nicely. I have a question when I'm not paying attention, so please do that.
So how many total vehicles do we have in the fleet?
Oh, 100 and...
So vehicles and equipment, let's keep that in mind too. 145 pieces of vehicle and equipment
Okay,
we manage.
do you calculate the other pieces of equipment the same as you do vehicles?
Yes.
Yes, everything.
So in this 29 that's all past their year of replacement, are they also included in your replacement formula as far as how much you're
Yes, we're applying the same formula to all pieces of equipment.
And how are you doing that if you've already passed
Wait,
their?
Mayor, point of order, though. Each vehicle has its own expected life.
Correct.
Correct, and so does equipment.
Agreed. So generically, it's the same formula, but for each item on there, it's slightly different based on its depreciation life cycle.
So the formula should be what its current age is within this lifespan and how close it is to when its life ends. And that should be what you should be computing as far as replacement, right?
Yes.
And if you're past that point, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Repeat that, Dan.
You don't charge to the department.
After you've accumulated enough.
After you accumulate enough money, you don't just keep charging and building.
No, I guess what I'm trying to say is you've got a batch of cars or equipment that is past its replacement time. You don't have the money to replace it. Is that correct?
No, we do have the money to replace it.
Oh, so why do we have equipment that hasn't been replaced yet if we have the money to replace it?
Back to the beginning, Dan.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't repeat. Can I ask for a repeat of the question?
Why do we have equipment
Why
that's
haven't- yeah.
past its end of life and we haven't already replaced it?
Because it's a benefit to get additional life out of it and not, the Holloway family, I run them till they drop. And I get as much out of the vehicle as I can. They don't go that far, but they do push it past the estimated life.
Oh, is that,
Explain all the variables, all the elements go into this. There's partly because we haven't come up with a program that the council will accept in some of those vehicles.
Right. We came to the committee and we asked for, I don't remember, 6, 7, 8 3/4 ton trucks or something? 7 3/4 tons. And we need to come back. We need to put, and that's just 7 of the 29 vehicles. So we have to come back and show, which ones need to be 3/4 ton, which are 1/2 ton, and justify and show the pros, the cons, and the cost. And then turn around and you look at the grader, or you look at the dump trucks, like Brian said. We're going to use them as long as we can. I mean, 0 tomorrow, they're going to be 0 in a year or two. Yes, it's more maintenance on Don, but we have to look at the usage on an annual basis. Some of the trucks, dump trucks, they're used maybe 4 weeks out of 52.
Okay.
So we take that all into consideration in what we do.
Yeah,
You also
so
take the useful life. So you have 2 identical vehicles you purchased 10 years ago.
you better talk in a microphone.
Explain this, Dan. You have 2 identical vehicles.
Oh, yeah, we got the blue. Oh, yeah.
Both have the exact same maintenance records, but one is actually just a better vehicle.
Yeah.
You got lucky on the motor, or whatever it might be.
What happened?
There is sort of a risk of diminishing return. You keep a vehicle too long, you lose the powertrain warranty, maintenance issues the costs start driving up.
Racing engines, everything.
So I'm hearing that we're going to have a big chunk of money that we're going to have to approve for this 29 vehicles. Is that right?
No, you're approving monies to restore the target for the reserves in that fleet department. Yeah, that's partially correct. I guess maybe someone could say it better. than I-
Eventually, you get 29 vehicles, yes. Staff will bring those back eventually too, once you get a plan together.
But we'll have the budget, it'll already be budgeted.
We'll have the reserves in there to address those
Well,
vehicles.
that was
yeah.
the question tonight. Should we be putting more aside rather than just for the next biennial?
Yeah.
Biennium. So you got 12 in one year, 8 in another. Huh?
Absolutely.
Well,
Well, we assume the council would support it. We just want to make sure the council members all understand the importance of sustaining this program and properly funding it. I mean, it's a really, we're very, very fortunate as a community that we had with a lot of the growth revenues to prime the pump and start this program. It's pretty hard to get one going, but once it's going, you definitely want to keep it going because it's hugely beneficial. A lot of cities lease their vehicles and spend significant dollars in interest costs and other overhead.
right.
So we have the fire engine that came next, and unfortunately, the fire chief had to leave.
I just wanted to put another point on Councilmember Shepherd's question. As Councilmember Ross had intimated before, when you added up those 49 vehicles, the 12, the 8, the 29, that total, even if the council said go out tomorrow and replace all those vehicles next year, at $3,050,000, that still comes short of the goal of the reserve fund that we're trying to build, Councilmember Shepherd, which by next year would be just shy of $3.5 million. So we'd still be $500,000 in the green on the reserve fund, even if you purchased all 49 of those vehicles within the next 2 years. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
So the fire truck, FireGen has an estimated replacement date of 2023. This is the one, however, the manufacturer no longer in business, no longer produces the parts. The table estimates amount required today. You can see replacement value at $335 and less the $259 that Don has currently set aside, and the trade-in value leaves you a balance of $37,000. But when you look at the grant that they applied for, and this is one with a ladder. This one, correct me, Drew, if I'm wrong, this is the one without the ladder, correct?
So yes, this is the one that's just replacing the fire engine that we
As
currently
is.
have, providing the same level of service as it currently does.
Right, and then this is the one with the ladder, and they
Correct.
applied for the grant, I believe it was $500,000. So if you look at this, assuming they don't get the grant, it's a $627,000 ask for the fire department. Whoop. So, yeah, without the fire chief here, he had to leave. Oh, just keep going? All right. Recommendations? Do you want to cover those, Drew?
I think we've probably gone over these pretty well this evening. So essentially, we need to continue to charge the annual fixed vehicle and equipment replacement costs according to the formula that we provided earlier. If we're not doing that, then we're suppressing the charges. Will eventually result in an underfunding, really not having enough cash on hand in order to pay for future replacements. So we need to continue with the methodology that we've provided you here this evening. And we also need to continue to review and refine the replacement schedule. So if we intend to reduce the rates, it really is going to come from right-sizing the amount of vehicles and equipment that we need. So if you take away a vehicle, we no longer have to charge an annual fixed cost out to the departments for that. And then secondly, we need to continue as a department, both Parks and Public Works and Finance, to monitor the difference between the set-aside amount of fund balance on an annual basis and make sure that they're relatively aligned.
Going through enhancements. So we have, number one is your water quality urban forestry program. We have $140,000 we showed you within the storm sewer. And this goes with council goal number 3. What we have here, it recognizes.
Hold up, Dan.
Yeah, please, let me check some math with my
Yeah,
accountant.
yeah, you're welcome to say it out loud if you guys want to, because it might be questions.
Drew's gonna get another point.
I mean, it might be questions of the
I think you've scored
have, so-
enough, Councilmember Holloway.
Okay, so let me go through my math one more time. So $500,000 a year collected from the departments in ER&R. That's about, call it $6 million. You have $3.5 million in reserve. So that's $6.5 million available over the next 6 years. You've got $3.7 million planned, at least according, again, to that little line chart, and you guys need to tell me if that's just notional and leave it alone. But $3.7 million planned. The 29 vehicles we're talking about are $1.5 million. So if we even bring those in, you're at $4.21 million over the next 6 years, which it gives you about a $2 million budget balance at the end of 6 years.
Assuming no
Yeah,
other
that's what I would expect.
Assuming more vehicles above the 49 are not coming in those 6-year period.
Well, I was assuming this was the plan
Oh,
for
I'm
the
sorry.
next
You're
6 years.
okay. Continue.
I'd love to see you know me, I'd love to see the line-by-line vehicle, but let's not go there.
Yeah.
All right, so you've got $2 million in ending fund balance in the other 6 years, so that may fold into your fire truck discussion.
Councilmember Mayhew.
But I think you have to be real careful that the entire fleet doesn't turn over in 6 years.
Correct.
And so you'll have vehicles the very next year after that. Plus you've got some vehicles that are on 20-year lives, and you got equipment all in between. So if the fund balance ever hits zero, something's drastically wrong. Because or maybe it only hits it once in 20 years, I suppose.
It
But it may get real, but generally speaking, you're going to expect to see a fund balance there. And what I'm hoping is that schedule you referred to, the individual line schedule, is something that once it's, I think I'm hearing that there's going to be some work done on that, but once it's done, I'm hoping that periodically Parks and Public Works Committee at least will be looking at that and just making sure big picture it looks okay and that those out years look sensible. But the fact that there's 2 million there is, or roughly, according to your calculation, is pretty much exactly what I would have expected.
It should with the ending, my P-brain says, the ending fund balance on average should be about equivalent or a little higher than our average yearly expenditure. So we got a year covered.
It's just too spiky to make that generalization, I think. It could go up to 4 or 5 years worth, or...
I said on average. Yeah, I agree.
All right.
Oh, on average one. Over the total. Yeah,
Over the total.
right. Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, before we move on, I think it's important to note that the Seahawks did win 27-24.
They did?
Yeah. In a spectacular win at the end.
Program history.
Yeah, I can't go home and watch it.
So here's the urban
I already know.
urban forestry program.
Yeah, let them read those on their own. We went through these
Okay.
numerous times.
Facilities maintenance renovation, here's the 100,000 I was talking about before. Here is the utilities technician, admin, assistant, contract administrator, CIP manager.
Could you explain this, this is a key piece, because you're not going to replace one of the vacant
CIP?
spots? Yeah.
CIP manager, Jim Dugan came, spoke to council. We're looking at not replacing our third engineer and actually putting in a CIP manager, contract administrator that will be able to address and help us with not only the current bond, but the future bonds that'll be coming to you.
This is the gentleman that talked about different ways to manage projects where it's design build or, more conventional processes and so forth. Councilor Ross?
So you already have one employee that's not going to be replaced
Correct.
within, so it's not really a new position. I mean, it's a new title.
Or new
right?
cost, yeah.
Or new
Or
cost.
new cost.
Right.
Right, okay.
Proposed enhancements. So you see this, utilities, operations, capital, distribution of the time for admin, and then your contracted administrator.
It's more of accounting issues, Dan. It's just, if they have anything left, I think we're done with this one.
So I think if Robert wants to come back and conclude, or we can get into council deliberations.
Well, I think 3.5 hours is pretty darn good.
It is 8:25.
Sure.
Wrap up,
there he is.
Robert, you want?
Robert, any conclusions you want to go over?
We're done.
We'll just come back with the follow-up items next time, and then
I'm sorry, come back with the what?
the follow-up items on the 26th, and we'll begin the deliberations. It sounds like we do need the 27th, so if everybody can block the 27th.
Still won't be here.
By phone or physically?
On the 27th, definitely not at all.
Here's the, we have to, obviously, on 26th, the council will be voting on the property tax levy. That's the key piece. And I think folks, council wanted to be at a level where they felt comfortable they could deliberate that. That's due by the 30th. We don't have to meet on the 27th, but we don't want to suggest that we'll conclude all discussions on the budget on the 26th of November. Could come back in early December. That's also going to be a committee week. And we're looking at council asking them to adopt the biennial budget the second Monday in December. So you've got roughly one meeting together for 2 hours on the 26th for any other further debates or discussions.
Councilor Shepherd.
So I was wondering if we could plan to have an executive session at our next deliberation, or our first deliberation.
Executive session?
Right.
what would be
What for?
the purpose?
Spending for legal fees.
Well, I'm not sure that that would qualify for an executive session, but
No.
it wouldn't have to be an executive session.
Well, I'm just wondering if...
Unless you think it's an item that exposes us to litigation.
I think so, yeah.
Councilmember Mayhew, is that your question?
No.
I didn't hear what she was saying, so I don't know what.
I think she's suggesting it's something about our legal expenditures. So are you talking about a particular case in which we're involved spending? Okay, so it's, if it's connected with a specific case, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that could be done.
Talk about the litigation, then yes.
Yeah, but you're wanting to discuss particular litigation with a particular, okay.
The other option would be the following week. However, that's a committee week, so the December 3rd, December 4th are both committee nights. You could potentially meet on Tuesday the 4th after, or maybe start F&A early and then conclude with the budget discussions. I only point that out because Wednesday, December 5th is actually the Sound City's annual meeting, which Snoqualmie's hosting here.
With the governor.
With the governor, so I think a fair number are going to be attending that. So the other option would be Thursday, December 6th.
We have the town hall discussion that starts at 6:30.
Oh,
Our first
I forgot
town
about
hall
that.
is 6:30 on the 6th.
We could discuss the budget there, Bob, yeah.
Could start at 5 o'clock and roll right into it, yeah.
So what happened to the 27th?
I understand that one council member is not going to be available, but I just didn't.
Well, there's not a council member available tonight either, so just keep going.
I understand. I just didn't. I want to be deferential to all the council members.
Appreciate that.
As you plan ahead. So
We could push a doodle poll out and see, we'll just try to find a mean that the maximum number of council members can make
The
it.
other potential is have the meeting on the 27th and then have a perhaps follow-up the following week.
So we're attempting to try.
Maybe Tuesday the 4th.
That's going to be tough because we've got ethics training in here until 4 with a special setup.
I understand. You got Tuesday the 27th of November, Tuesday December 4th. We could start those meetings at 6 o'clock with the council.
No problem with
Could run for 3 hours each night. That's in addition to Monday the 26th, which you have already 2 hours set aside.
So we have F&A on the 4th.
That's correct. We'd have to run F&A.
At 5 o'clock and do it 5 to 7 and then come in here at 7 for full council meeting.
Yeah, or F&A 5 to 6.
It's okay if we push out a doodle poll in the next day or two.
We do that. All right.
Councilmember Lassie.
Is there's probably not precedent, but is there cause for canceling committee meetings to hold another session? So
Yeah,
whether
the thought occurred.
December 3rd or December 17th week?
We'll have to evaluate how full those meetings look in terms of agenda bills, but that's certainly something to consider, I think.
Yeah, the December 3rd would be your one option. Council typically, traditionally has canceled.
Cancel the last ones,
Yeah.
the last session of the month.
Yeah.
I know. And we're, as a follow-up to that, our deadline is what? December 31st?
December 31st, for the budget, yes.
Well, but, and even if we approve a budget, there's still got to be paper, it's got to be documented and issued and signed and.
I think you pass the ordinance, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the
We
ordinance
have 2
isn't
months
passed
to do
until
the
the mayor
document
signs it,
afterward.
so, right? I mean.
And filed.
And filed.
If you do
You need a business day there.
Instantaneous.
You need a business day to do that.
I wouldn't suggest a council meeting on the 24th of December. Maybe you want to do it the previous week if you wanted to go there, but you'd have to, it's still, if you're discussing the budget, it'd be difficult to ask you to adopt the budget the same night. But
Councilmember Holloway's here. I'll be here.
we'll send out the doodle poll for Tuesday. We got Monday night already at 5 o'clock, yet potentially Tuesday the 27th. We'll send out a poll on that one. And then Tuesday the 4th, potentially. And then I think that'd be it. I think Town Hall, I don't think I want to interrupt that issue. Asking council to come in for a budget discussion. So
Let's
we
set
got
up those
potentially
next 2 meetings.
2 additional dates. We'll send out the poll. Everybody took notes on that, Jody? All right.
So we're not meeting on the 27th then?
That's potentially a date.
No, I think we're going to throw that in the doodle poll. I mean, our target is going to be to try and find dates that work with the maximum number of council members. You know, if we end up, we don't want to pick a date that 2 or 3 can't make it. If we can pick one that only one can miss it, then we'll go with that. Hopefully, we'll find a date everybody can make it. Or at least call in. All right. Anything further to discuss or any other questions tonight then? All right. There's no other, no objection, no further business. The meeting is adjourned.